In 1998, at around 2 years old, my mom gave me the best present ever, a fluffy, Wrigley purebred golden retriever puppy that I named Maggie. Despite minor puppy incidences, like disappearing pizza act, Maggie was the sweetest, most docile and well-tempered dog I have ever met. My dad was a real jerk, though to his credit, I never met anyone who could yell like that. He never hit us or anything, he was always just in a bad mood. Maggie hated any sort of yelling, aggression, or anger. She would immediately put her tail between her legs and find an empty room in her tiny apartment to hide. Thankfully, Mom didn't want me to be in that type of an environment, and around the time Maggie turned 1, we got out of there. We lived with my grandparents for quite a while. They loved having us, and loved us being there. We were a real happy family. My grandpa, one of 15 children, and my grandma, one of 7, frequently had large backyard barbecues that featured all their siblings' kids, grandkids, etc. People in hordes went in and out, and Maggie relished the attention from all, never so much as lifting a lip of growling. She loved being in that neighborhood too, frequently being stopped for pets on walks. My mom married my awesome stepdad, and we moved into a new beautiful house. Maggie was getting older, so every day I took her for a walk around the same 2 blocks for her joint health. It was October of my 8th grade year. Previously I had mentioned to my mom that there was a real creepy guy who seemed to always be sitting on his porch to watch me as I walked Maggie every day. I sort of got used to it, I guess, taking my mom's advice never to walk directly past his house, but to walk on the other side of the street. This particular day, my stepdad surprised me with a pair of red ruby slippers that were extremely nice to match my Dorothy costume for Halloween this year. They were my first pair of shoes with heels on them. My mom warned me to break them in before the Halloween dance, so I decided to wear the shoes to walk Maggie that day. I had never felt cooler. I wonder if it was the heels that finally set him off. I was so happy strolling along that when Maggie stopped to sniff, I didn't even realize we were across the street from the creeper's house until there he was, walking up to us. I immediately felt the urge to run, but not only were the heels a hindrance, but Maggie couldn't keep up the way she used to. There was zero chance of me leaving my dog, so I froze. He sauntered up to us and asked if the dog was friendly. I gave an automatic yes, kicking myself for it when I realized I should have lied. He reached out a hand for her to give a sniff, and time froze for a moment when she took one look at him and started snarling, lunged at his throat. He fell back and she continued to charge, dragging me along by the leash as he tried to get away. He took off running, and so did I, faster than I thought was possible. Upon hearing the story, my mom promptly gave her a juicy bone. She never did anything like that again, and continued to be friendly to all. I never saw that creepy porch walker again. I know she saved me that day. Thank you for being the best girl, Maggie. Rest in peace. Hey everyone, I guess this might not be that crazy of a story, but it had my heart pumping. I was just at a gas station a few hours ago, and I get out of my Jeep and there's this older dude just standing there, waiting to talk to me. Of course, he follows me into the gas station, telling me dumb shit like how beautiful my smile was. So I'm getting a pop, and I see him at the register, and decide to hang back a little bit until he left. He did not leave. He stood by the cash register, annoying the attendant for what felt like forever. Eventually, I'm tired of just looking like an idiot standing over by the beverage section, so I make the decision to just deal with it. I go over to the other attendant and pay, and say, "Hey listen, this guy's being a creep. You watch, he's gonna follow me out." Of course, the attendant didn't make much of it. What do you know, the guy all of a sudden doesn't need to talk to the cashier anymore, and promptly follows me out. I look back at the tenant I was talking to and see a look on his face like, oh shit. This guy still follows me and continues to be a creep until I dip into my car and peel out. I thought there was no way that he was going to follow me. I was wrong. He followed me for miles. Thankfully, I was close to my dad's, a retired chief of police, and called him in a panic. I then drove over there to meet my brother and my dad standing in the garage waiting. My brother runs up to the car and escorts me back to the house. Now they are waiting for this guy, and they are pissed. They wait for a decent amount of time. They want this guy to pull around. They finally go in. I smoke with my brother on the back deck, and then they can see his truck just go by, which is weird because it's a subdivision, and my dad lives in a cul-de-sac. So how did this guy know to wait and then pull around? Or maybe I lost him for a bit, and he took his chances, and of course spotted my stupid car. I have a ridiculous orange Jeep, and everyone that knows me can spot it from a mile away. It's nice, but it's also like a blaring spotlight in the dark. Plus I have this giant pink sticker on the back of a pit bull that says, "Show me your pitties." So there's that. Not really helping myself too much in the low profile department. So this guy knows my car now. Good stuff. I honestly don't really know what his intentions were, because it's not like I was gonna eventually give up and stop my car for him. Edit 1. My boyfriend was saying that the guy was probably intending to run me off the road. It was raining really bad, so it wouldn't have been that hard for him to do so, since his truck was way bigger than mine. Again, I'm super glad that I was close to my dad's. Edit 2. My dad just gave me a giant bottle of pepper spray foam to keep in my Jeep. If that guy does bother me again, he's gonna get a pepper spray bath. Any woman that's reading this and might not know, don't buy the fancy little defense things for your keychain. Buy pepper spray instead, or even both. Here's why. If you reach out and punch whoever, you are too close, they can grab your arm and then you're fucked. Try not to touch or even get that close to the violator, if you are in that position. Take self-defense classes as well. It's worth your life. You might get an asshole cashier like me one day that doesn't help you at all, and it might not have turned out the way it did with me. I was in my mid-20s a few years ago and was visiting relatives in Munich. I was really excited to be there as it's a great city, and I managed to get there during a week with some cool events. My personality would be considered pretty bubbly and excitable, so I'm walking all around the city with a big fat smile across my face and some good music in my ears. I had a lot of time by myself because my relatives were working during the day. So one day, I decided to do a little shopping in the city center. I wanted to go to Forever 21, as I don't have one in my country. So after having some brunch and coffee by myself, I went there. It was huge and has 3 stories. So I'm going up and down escalators to really get a look through everything on each floor. After a little while, I walked past this guy wearing a turquoise t-shirt. His arm was casted as if broken and was hanging in a sling that went around his neck, and he had a phone in the healthy arm. As I previously mentioned, I had a constant smile on my face, and I looked at his face. We have the briefest eye contact, and then he's gone. Or so I think. I didn't pay too much attention to my surroundings, so I didn't really look around until the next time I got on the escalator. I looked back, and there he is, a few feet behind me, holding his phone like he's filming me. I feel really uncomfortable and try to cover up my backside as best I can. I get off and go to some rack to see if he comes along, which he indeed does. I walk somewhere else faster. Still, he's looking at me from behind a rack close by. Finally, I go down the escalator and then immediately back up. He still follows me. At this time, he has a smug look on his face. It feels like he really wants me to get freaked out. Finally, after 10 to 15 minutes of this, I run over to the women's underwear section and get low. I stay there peeping out from one of the racks, and I see him looking around for me. At some point, he spots me, and his face turns a bit sour, and he finally leaves me alone. I stay there for a few minutes just in case. As I'm leaving the store, I see him further away walking after a different girl. I felt so sick, and I didn't even understand what the hell he was doing. It felt creepy, and for some reason the cast made it even more unsettling. I don't know if this counts as a creepy encounter, but I sure felt gross for the rest of the day, and still remember it vividly. I'm a woman in my late 20s who was shopping for groceries earlier in the week. As I was passing the vegetarian section, I passed by a guy whose cart was stopped right in front of it. We seemed to both be looking for what was there, and soon after, I made a move to go. He said something like, "This stuff is good, huh?" And I replied, "Normally they have more options," and then continued pushing my cart. I noticed that he was following me throughout the aisles, and as I went to stand in line, he and his cart were right behind me. He was asking how long I've been in the city, how long I've been vegetarian, that I look like a vegetarian, and what's my name. At this point, my left hand with my engagement ring is on the cart, very visible, and I don't want to be the person who coldly says, "I have a fiancé," so I don't. He keeps chatting, says he stood in line purposely to talk to me. I stare ahead for a whole minute, not responding. Then my turn to check out comes. When I was checking out, I saw him leave the store, no cart, no bags, no groceries, and with a friend. He looked at me briefly and then walked more quickly. It felt weird and scammy, and not like I was being hit on. I was super glad to get out of that area and head home. I know this isn't as scary as many other stories here, but I can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had been alone. I was on my way to a play rehearsal with my roommate, who happens to be the director, and his partner. I don't go out much because I work from home. Taking the subway was kind of an adventure. Anyway, we took the subway in a station where the platform is located on both sides of the train, while the rails are just in between. It wasn't as crowded as I expected, and we were only going 5 stations away, so I decided to just lean against the opposite door since I knew it wouldn't open for another 4 stations. After a slow ride, we get to the station where the platform is between the trains. This means that the door that opens is the one that I'm leaning against. So as we get off the station, I move to the side to let people get in and out of the train. Then this guy comes in and stands right next to me. When I look at him, we make eye contact, and it just gave me the creeps. I turn around to talk to my friends so this guy would realize I'm not alone, but my roommate is already ahead of me and stands closer to me while looking at the guy. He immediately got off the train and pretended to find another door to get back in, but instead walked across the platform to take another train instead, the one headed in the direction we were coming from. I felt totally creeped out, realizing he wasn't even going in the same direction as me. Then my roomie tells me that the guy took the subway in the same station we did. He remembered him because he creeped him out too when he saw him. So this guy took the train the same place we did, but when he saw my roommate, he flew and took another train in the opposite direction. I know nothing actually happened, but it's scary to think about how different it would have been if I had been alone. This happened a few years back when my daughter was about 7. She's a cute little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl with freckles across her nose and cheeks. My husband, daughter, and I stopped at a shopping center while my husband went into an auto parts store next door, which is where we were going to meet back up with him after my daughter got me to see a kitten for adoption. We were looking at a cute little black and white kitten when an older gentleman approached and stood next to my daughter. She looked up at him and smiled and moved to my left side to put me between him and her. She's always been a little shy around strangers. Even as a preteen, she still acts this way. The gentleman smiled, staring at my daughter, and said, "Men don't like shy girls that don't want to be near them." I nodded my head and told my daughter it was time to go. I grabbed her hand and walked away from him. It was the first time she didn't argue with me about leaving the little kittens. We get to the auto parts store and I tell my husband what happened. He made a comment about how the guy being a creep, but told me not to worry. He was going to finish up and pay for the parts he needed, and we were going to go. My daughter and I went to look at the car accessories while we waited for him. Men love a girl with freckles though, the gentleman said, standing next to me in the aisle, smiling down at my daughter. Luckily, my husband was standing next to me with his bags. He cleared his throat and the gentleman's face turned red. He excused himself and walked out of the store. We still shop there, but I haven't seen him again, and I hope I never do. I very rarely go out without my husband now, unless it's through a drive-thru. Being followed home is not uncommon where I'm from, and sadly, it's not rare either. Men will see you walk at night or even day sometimes and catcall you to get your attention. No matter how often it happens, it's not something you can get used to, and it's scary to be in that situation. This night, I was with my ex walking home. He was a horrible boyfriend, and he got extremely drunk, forcing me to walk him home to make sure he goes inside. I asked him to call a taxi for me because my phone was dead, and he agreed and went inside. I stood outside his apartment waiting, but as time went by, I realized that the taxi was probably not coming. At the time, I thought that they forgot to send the car, but now I realized that my ex probably didn't even call and just passed out. It was December and extremely cold outside. I was angry at my ex for getting drunk, angry at the taxi company for forgetting to send a car, angry at everything and everybody. It was almost midnight, and if you've read my previous experiences, you will understand why I don't like to walk home, even though it's only a 15-minute walk. As I am waiting, I see a Jeep parked a little further away from me. The guy gets out of his car and leans on it, just staring at me. After a couple minutes, I realized that he was waiting for me to approach him, and if I didn't, he would be the one to make the move. I panic and start thinking what I should do. I have two options. The first one was to walk home and risk him coming into my street in the dark. A 15-minute walk gives him plenty of time to hurt me. Or my second option is to walk to my grandma's house, which is about 5 minutes away, but her whole street is dark and pretty much empty. She lives on a street that's mostly stores and offices. She refused to sell her house when other people did, so there aren't many houses around her. I couldn't go back to my ex's apartment because I had to be buzzed in, and it was midnight. I decided to go to my grandma's and started walking quickly. The guy, of course, gets in his car and starts driving behind me. I pretend that I'm on a call in hopes that he wouldn't do anything if I was on the phone with someone. As soon as I see my grandma's house, I run as quickly as I can into her yard. Everyone is asleep, so my best bet is to ring the doorbell because I don't have a key and hope someone might be awake. Thankfully, my uncle is. I tell him someone is following me. He drives a Jeep and I'm scared that he might hurt me. My uncle does not hesitate. He runs out into the cold December night in his shorts and t-shirt and sees a guy. He yells to me, "Is that him?" The guy sees this and pretends that he's on the phone and gets into his car and drives away. My uncle calls a taxi for me and waited for me until the taxi got there. I thought that would be it. As soon as I got into the taxi, I felt safe. I tell the driver my address, and as soon as he turns, we see the car. He tries to follow the taxi. At this point, I have absolutely no clue what his intentions are. Does he want to hurt me because I got my uncle on him? I start crying and quickly explain to the driver what's going on. He was an older gentleman, and I felt like he has been waiting for this moment his whole life. He told me not to worry and that he'll lose him and won't allow the guy to see where I live. He ended up losing him, mostly because the guy in the Jeep just gave up and left, but that taxi driver got to feel like a hero, and I got to get home safely. This happened a couple weeks back in the UK. I'm a very tall 45-year-old guy on medical disability due to renal failure. Weak bones. I wanted to make lunch rather than be lazy and order pizza, and despite the pain it caused by walking, I decided to walk for 30 minutes round trip as part of my meditated exercise. I get to a local store and grab some of the basic things to make a quick meal. While I'm there, I feel a sharp pain fly up my back, then my left leg, and I start limping. Knowing when this happens, I have 20 minutes tops before the pain gets too much, so I go and get my stuff paid for. I leave, cross the street, and sit on a public bench and let the pain fade. Once the pain faded, I started walking again, only for two young guys in suits to come up to me wearing badges, identifying themselves as members of the Church of England. Asked me if I was okay, and that letting God into my life would stop the pain. I politely told them I'm fine and just need to get home before it flares up again, and, big mistake, told them that I'm not religious. Believe in what you want, but I don't anymore. They tell me that their job is to save me in the word of God. I start walking off, but my leg flares up again, and I start limping. These two guys follow me and keep trying to stop me despite me saying to leave me alone, telling me that they need to help me. I get to my house, open the door, and they try to push into my house. I stand in the doorway, now in agony, freaking out and anxiety taking over. My retired neighbor sees them and comes over just as I lose it. I tell them, "This is private property, you're trespassing and making me feel unsafe. Fuck off." They looked offended, but my neighbor tells them to leave me alone. They storm off, grumbling. My neighbor helps me sit and makes my meal, staying with me till I calm down. I called the Church of England and complained about my interaction, get an apology, and told that the two workers will be retrained and kept out of my area. I have not seen them since, but I've seen different ones who asked how I am and left me alone otherwise. This happened a few years ago. I was walking back to my dorm from college one evening, around 6 p.m. I had my headphones in and was minding my own business. I see a taxi parked near the sidewalk that I had to take to get to my dorm. It was a fairly crowded road, so I didn't think too much about it. But as I passed him, he rolled down his window and asked me to take out one of my earphones. Then he asked me if I needed a ride home. I politely declined and tried to walk past him. He started driving his car next to me as I walked on the sidewalk. He kept insisting on giving me a ride, saying, "I know you live in the third building. I've been watching you for the last 3 days. I just want to give you a ride home." At this point, my mind went blank and I didn't know how to respond. He went on to say, "You told me yesterday to come meet you here today. That's why I got my car." He even described what clothes I was wearing the day before. Throughout this, I'm just trying to get away from him and get to a shortcut that would take me away from the road so that he couldn't follow me. I kept on telling him that I have no clue who he is and I've never spoken to him. I try to walk away and he gets out of his car and aggressively tells me to come back at once and not to run away from him when he's talking. Luckily at this point, a friend of mine who saw this was happening as she returned from college called out for me, and seeing her, the guy got back in his car quickly and booked it. I never saw him again after that. This might not seem like a big deal now, but even to this day, I feel paranoid about someone watching me whenever I'm alone. Okay, so this happened to me 20 minutes ago. I was just coming back from school and stopped at the Starbucks nearest to my school. As I was going into Starbucks, there was this old white man who begged me to get him some coffee. Since it was a small coffee and me being nice, I said, "Sure, what do you want?" He just said a small coffee, and I was like, "I can get you what I'm getting." And he said, "Okay." I go into Starbucks, get our drinks, and come back out. Then he asked me if I lived around here. I said yes. He asked me if I go to school here, and is my apartment near. I said yes. He asked me if I lived alone. I said no. Which is true, I live with 3 other people. He asked me if I live with roommates, and I said yes, and I totally felt creeped out. This is the first time I've ever had this type of experience, and honestly I'm a little grossed out. I don't think I ever want to go to Starbucks again, and this is why I continue to carry pepper spray and a taser. So this happened a few months ago and still generally freaks me out. My work involves providing in-home service, so a lot of my day is driving around to clients' homes. I have one client that lives about 30 minutes from me in a very rural area. Anyway, I left my home around 11 a.m. to get to this client. At a stoplight around 5 minutes from my house, which is in the middle of a heavily trafficked city, the car in front of me turned on their left turning signal. So naturally, when the light turned green, I drove around them. After I passed them, I noticed them turn their turning signal off and instantly went straight. So now they were behind me. I thought nothing of it at this time because who doesn't get confused about directions sometimes? So I kept driving down these little backcountry roads that did not have any traffic, and the car continues to follow. After about 20 minutes, I start to get more aware. While this car could very simply be going the same direction as me, I found it a little off that their route was matching mine exactly. When I finally got to my client's house and made a turn into the driveway, I fully expected the car to keep driving, but nope, they turned into the driveway behind me as well. The driveway was narrow, thus they were now essentially blocking me in. I turned my car off and waited a few minutes, and the car behind me stayed on and didn't move. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside. I sat in the car waiting, and the person in the car behind me didn't get out. They just sat there, car running. I called the client and asked if she could stand on her porch so I could get out of my car, and she happily obliged. The minute my client stepped out on the porch, the car very quickly backed out and drove away, and the client didn't recognize the car. I have no idea why it happened. I didn't do anything to cause any sort of road rage, so why this car suddenly started following me is very bizarre. And if it was something sinister, why do it midday? Anyway, it's just been on my mind for a while, and I thought I'd share it. I really have no explanation for what happened, which is probably the most frustrating part. Okay, so here we go. I just remembered that this happened and only now realized that I could potentially have been in massive danger. This happened when I was 14 years old. I'm very quiet and look like the typical messy, makeshift punk kid. I had a bad family life, so I spent most of the time wandering around the town with my friends, avoiding home, and when nobody I knew was out, I would just walk around by myself. I had a few small piercings at the time, but my most prominent one was a little ear stretcher made out of bone carved into a snake that hung from my earlobe. I'd been hanging out in the square where myself and company used to loiter when this very petite, hippity-dippity smiley lady came over and started chatting to us. This square was known for people gathering and mingling, so we didn't think anything of an unusual woman coming to talk, despite the age difference of at least 15 years. After a few minutes of chatting, she turned to me and started showering me with compliments and asking me loads of questions about myself. Being the little shy hermit crab that I was, I just mumbled short replies and didn't resist when she reached out to touch my earring, even though it made me cringe hard because I hate being touched. She made such a huge deal of my earring, going on and on about it, and kept trying to touch my arms and shoulder like we were besties. I was obviously uncomfortable, but didn't tell her to fuck off as I hadn't grown into my voice yet. She hung around until my friends had to get their bus home, so we said our goodbyes and I walked to the bus station. Nothing unusual happened. I saw my friends off as usual and started the slow walk across the city to my own stop. I had some time to kill, so I took my time walking around random streets, taking the longest route possible. The sun was just about to go down as I was walking down a narrow street lined with large glass shop facades. I had mad teen paranoia about my looks, so I could never resist looking at myself in a window. And when I did, I spotted two people trailing along behind me. I glanced around and saw the same woman from earlier still smiling at me, but now wearing a big shawl over her head, accompanied by a really big bearded man in a black hoodie with a hood up, only about 20 feet behind me. I kept walking, faster, approaching the corner when I heard her call out, "Hey girl, I like your earring. Hey, I just want to know where you got your earring from." I already really didn't like her for touching me. She was annoying and I just didn't feel like engaging, so I ignored her. I rounded the corner and darted into the other side of the street that would lead me to my bus stop. The bus was right there waiting for its time to take off, so I just hopped in and forgot about it until now. At the time, I didn't really think much of it. I didn't really realize how inappropriate it was for random adults to just befriend random underage teens, especially since it was a woman, so I felt like there was no threat from her. I assumed that the man was her boyfriend or something. I truly thought that seeing her again was a coincidence, but thinking of it now, I realized she must have followed us to the bus station, seen me, the quiet one, walk away by myself, and called in backup and followed me. I wasn't aware of human traffickers luring kidnapping methods like I am today, and actually got a shock when I put it together right now. What do you think? Coincidence with just a very strange lady, or something darker for a vulnerable teen? This happened 15 years ago, and all I can do now is speculate. This happened to me a few years ago and still makes me anxious. I had this classmate who skipped most of the classes until the final 2 months of school. We were like 13 at the time, so everyone thought of it as super strange because her mom had been notified by the school a lot of times and she still wouldn't come. In those last 2 months where she actually attended school, we got close because we both like anime, and since she was a girl I felt much more comfortable talking about it with her than my male classmates, as I was still terrified of men after a sexual assault incident that happened with a friend of my dad. One day, we went together to my martial arts class because she wanted to see how it was, and she kept a plastic container that I couldn't see through and a card in a plastic bag. I thought about it, but since she avoided the question, I left it as it was. When we left the class, she gave me a bag and it had Snickers in the box, and the card had a pressed flower inside with a confession, and she asked me to be her girlfriend. To which I tried to politely decline, since I had no romantic feelings for her. After that, it got awkward, and I hurried to leave her by her building's door, and left. After that, she started skipping class again, and I was thankful because I didn't know how to act with her. Sometime later, in the last days of school that year, I discovered that before she asked me, she spread to the whole school how she felt about me, and added me as a bisexual for everyone in the school, even though my tight-knit class of 8 people were the only ones that I had come out to. And on one of the days she did attend, she tried to get everyone to pity her and pressure me into giving up and start dating her. Creepy but okay. She moved schools, and I didn't hear from her for some time until I started bumping into her a lot when I went out, which was not that strange since we live close by. After New Year's, but before classes got back, I had to go to the store to get some things for dinner that my mom asked me to get. When I got home, I saw a message from her. She said that she saw me leaving when she was walking around my block, and that she proceeded to follow me to the supermarket and take a picture of me. I freaked out and showed it to my dad, saying that I was afraid, and asked if I could get a restraining order or something, but he said it wasn't necessary since there was nothing she could do to me, as we were both teenagers. I didn't block her because I wanted to know if she would send me anything else, but she didn't send anything after that. When I thought it was safe and she had given up, she appeared in my martial arts class with her elderly grandma and kept asking to be paired with me. I was terrified and paired up with my friend, who was a very nice elderly lady, and she ended up being paired with her grandmother. After that, she vanished, never ran into her again, never received another message. She never showed up there again. When class got back, I discovered that she apparently had moved to another state with her mother. I was a senior going to a pretty well-respected community college near my hometown. One of my classes was an intensive public speaking course with a professor that I adored. At the start of the semester in this class, nothing was out of the ordinary. My classmates and I either got along or kept to ourselves. We were all adults after all. This was my last class of the day, so I would often have up to an hour to kill beforehand and would always look for a quiet, comfy nook to either study, work on assignments, or watch YouTube. One day, I was working on a paper in the nook near my public speaking class when I noticed this guy from said class standing at the entrance of the lobby, staring at me. I just ignored it because I was busy. He walked over and stood above me, staring until I acknowledged him with a hi. He proceeded to take a seat near me and started asking me really mundane questions about the weather and our class. I humored him, but eventually said I was trying to work on a paper and would like to be left alone. He just went silent and sat, watching me until it was time for class. He walked with me, despite me not making eye contact or engaging with him in any way. Our classroom was set up in a way where each row has a solid desk on a big step, each one higher than the one in front, like stairs. I'm sorry, I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure there's a name for it. This guy sat below me, so when I noticed he had turned around in his seat to stare at me, a lot of other people did too. It was very obvious. I chose to ignore this behavior at first, but I started to notice him everywhere. The campus wasn't huge, but it certainly had enough teeny study spaces and nooks that a person could easily hide away from others. That was the whole point of study nooks. Still, he would always be around, no matter where I went, watching me. The incident that made me first report him was, on a presentation day for our class, he found me in the computer lab where I sat with a couple of my friends, but I was, unfortunately, not sitting in between any of them. So this guy, who I'll call Noah from now on, walked up next to me, making sure his crotch was close to my face, and asked me if I was ready to give my speech. I said yes, and that I'm trying to work on last-minute changes to the outline. He then pulled a leather belt out of his backpack and scooted a tad closer to me, started putting his belt on, saying, "Look, I got a new belt for the speech." When I just nodded and went back to working on my outline, he said, "Watch this," and scooted so close to me that my ear brushed his pants when I turned my head. I was mortified and instinctively scooted my chair away, which made my friends look over at what was going on. One of them asked me what was up, and I told them nothing. Noah eventually walked away after getting his belt on, and then I told everyone what happened. My friend Nicole told me to report him after I explained his other behavior. After class that day, I did. I went to the student advocate and told her everything that happened, that I was uncomfortable, and asked what she could do. She told me, I think he may be on the spectrum, or just socially awkward. Have you tried getting to know him?" I told her I didn't want to get to know him, and that I shouldn't have to befriend people who made me feel uncomfortable, even if they were on the spectrum, or socially awkward. She told me that she would take what I said into consideration and only come back if he did anything actually worth reporting, since sticking your junk in someone's face is apparently not a form of harassment. So Noah kept following me, appearing wherever I was. Sometimes he would try to talk to me, sometimes he would watch me. He followed me through the parking lot to my car one time. He stared at me in class. He tried talking to people he knew were my friends to try to get involved in conversations with me when they were hanging out with me. After class one day, I decided to go to McDonald's near campus to grab my dinner. I decided to go inside because I used to have a thing about drive-thrus for some reason. As I was waiting for my food, the girl who took my order came up to the counter and called me over. She asked, "Do you know that guy?" I turned to my right, and Noah had pulled his car up to the glass window, where the drive-thru line was supposed to be. Except there were no cars in front of him, and he was 50 feet behind the menu and speaker, just staring at me. As soon as I made eye contact with him, he backed his car up and began pulling into the parking space to the left of my car. My stomach dropped. Now he had followed me off of campus. My face must have went pale because the girl looked concerned, and I told her exactly what was happening, that Noah was stalking me on campus, and now he was here. This girl, honestly my hero, said, "I'm gonna rush your order. If you feel unsafe and he starts heading in here, I'll hide you back here and call the police." Just as she got my food on the counter, Noah got out of his car and started walking towards the entrance. I told the girl that I was just gonna put my head down and rush past him, get in my car and get out of there. She told me to be safe. I walked with a purpose out of McDonald's, walked straight past Noah. He started trying to talk to me and follow me to my car, so I ran, got in, locked the doors and pulled out. I looked in my mirrors the entire way home, scanning, scared that I would see his car behind me. Luckily, he didn't follow me home. The next day, I told my friend Nicole what happened and that I wasn't sure if I could report this because of what the student advocate said. She was appalled and said that she would go with me to report it. We sat down and I told the student advocate everything that had happened since the last time I reported it. Her response was that I was overreacting and that she would document my report but wouldn't grant me a campus restraining order against him. She left me with, "If he does something to you, touches you, hurts you, then we can investigate and get the police involved for a restraining order." Nicole and I were angry and I felt so defeated. We went to talk to our mutual friend Amanda about it and found out he has been creepy to her as well, to the point that he had followed her to her car and wouldn't let her leave until she talked to him. I guess when he wasn't following me around, he was following her. She said that she hasn't reported it because she didn't think anyone would take her seriously. She also said another friend of hers was stalked by him for a few months the previous semester, to the point that her friend dropped the class that they were in together to throw off his knowledge of her schedule because the student advocate wouldn't help her either. The next day, all three of us, Nicole, Amanda, and I, went to the student advocate to show her that he's been doing this to more than one person and that he had actually kept Amanda from leaving. The student advocate finally decided to start an investigation. Unfortunately, all of us were graduating soon by this point and never saw the outcome of the investigation. Edit. I did try to talk to campus police first. The officer I spoke to told me that the process for my type of situation was to talk to the student advocate first, who would determine if it was worth filing a report and taking action. The investigation involved the student advocate talking to Noah and my professor. It didn't involve the police whatsoever, though I wish it had. Hi everyone, I'm going to start this post by saying that I haven't told anyone about this whole story, mainly because of fear, but also because the guy I'm going to talk about is the son of one of my dad's friends. I just know for a fact that my father will end up blaming all of this on me. I'm currently a senior in high school and live in a pretty nice town in North Carolina. It all started about a year ago when I was 16. At the time, I was working at Starbucks as a barista. It was a Thursday, and surprisingly, the cafe was almost empty. A few minutes before my end of shift, one of my colleagues informed me that a cute guy's here to see you. I was kind of confused. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time. I'm pretty average, so I couldn't imagine a guy would be interested in me. As I turned around, I recognized the boy instantly. Henry, my dad's best friend's son. He was 3 years older than me, and for some reason that I wasn't aware of, he enjoyed making me feel miserable, calling me fat, ugly, and all the other sweet things that you really want to hear as an already insecure teenager. So for obvious reasons, seeing him at my workplace didn't fill me with joy. Now, on a completely objective point of view, he was very good looking. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and he knew that he was attractive, which made me want to punch his smirk off his handsome face. Henry was actually there to apologize for being a complete douchebag and confess that he actually really liked me, but he didn't know how to act around me because you radiate such powerful energy. It's really destabilizing. Weird timing, but okay. Being the dumb girl I was, I accepted his apologies, and from that moment on, we kept in touch every day. He would send me good morning and good night texts, give me cute nicknames, and whatever couples do. However, he never asked me to be his girlfriend. but he would introduce himself to others as my one and only true love. Should have seen red flags from the start. He would show up at my place without asking me at least once a week. I live alone with my dad, who actually really liked the boy, so my old man didn't care about his constant presence at my home. After a few months of our relationship, I decided to call it off. He was being really possessive. He was jealous of my girlfriends, and I discovered that he was in contact with his previous girlfriend and kept on telling me not to worry about it. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He shrugged it off and said, "Okay, whatever you want, babe." Don't get me wrong, I didn't want him to hurt because of me, but he just seemed so nonchalant about it, to the point where it was almost worrying. I thought this story should end there, but oh boy, I was wrong. Even after the breakup, he kept coming over and taking naps on my bed while I wasn't home. When I confronted him about it, he would respond with, "I came to see your dad," or "We're still friends. I don't see what's bothering you." What's bothering me is that if you weren't wearing that expensive ass cologne with a strong ass smell, I wouldn't have known that you came in my room while I was out. I tried to tell my dad that Henry and I weren't together anymore, and that he had no right to come over and make himself at home in my own room. He just laughed and said I was being a drama queen, so I guess you understand why I'm kind of stuck at this point. What I didn't know was, Henry had basically been following me everywhere. I noticed it a few weeks ago, but I'm pretty sure that he's been doing it for quite some time now. He would follow my car as I was going to school, park his truck in the Starbucks parking lot whenever I was working, and would peek through my bedroom window and leave handprints that I only saw after some time. How did this dumbass chick not notice before? Well, as a horror movie fan and a true crime podcast enthusiast, it's not really unusual to feel observed or spied on. At least I think. Plus, his truck was pretty common, so I couldn't tell if it was him or not. Until a few days ago, my car had a problem with one of its tires, so I had to take the bus for a little while. One morning I got out of my house and saw his truck, and immediately made out his face as he was sitting in the driver's seat, and that's when I connected the dots. My gut feeling going in a frenzy whenever I was out, 3 of my tires being slashed, the handprints on my bedroom window. When the realization hit me, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt paralyzed, and tears welled up in my eyes. I felt nauseous and decided that I needed to talk about it to someone, because I've read enough stories about it, and trust me when I tell you that crazy ex-boyfriend plus helpless girl don't work out well together. I made up my mind and told my friend Tyler, who was 5 years older than me and studying law. He unfortunately told me that I couldn't do anything because I didn't have concrete proof, and it would be my word versus Henry's. And Henry is a good manipulator. Now I'm stuck because I don't know what to do. I tried to take pictures of his car, but due to lack of light in my neighborhood, I never managed to snap one in which we could recognize him. Whenever he's parked in front of my house and we make eye contact, he usually starts driving off quickly. I haven't seen him in 3 days, however my gut feeling is still making me go crazy. So, crazy Henry, let's not meet again, but who knows when he'll show up again. I wasn't very popular in high school, and a lot of people didn't like me because of rumors, so I rarely had any friends from my class. After the whole bullying, I decided to sign up for French class to avoid drama. First day of French class, I made friends with a girl named Melissa. After a few weeks of being friends with Alyssa, I started noticing how weird she was acting, and I was about to ask her what's wrong when she put her hand over my mouth and threw me some bushes. I was about to yell when she told me to shut up, and of course I was confused. She lets out a sigh of relief, and I was asking what's wrong. She then shamelessly tells me how she has a stalker, and how she's been having a stalker since the beginning of the year. And that's why she doesn't have any friends, because he becomes her friend's stalkers too. I held her hand and told her that I wouldn't leave her side no matter what, and that made her happy. Months after the stalker talk, we made a friend group called the Fam Squad. I know, cringe. We would hang out almost every day. I never really noticed the stalker until he would show up to places we would go. The thing is, no one told him. He would show up to our friend Sebastian's house and pool. He kept stalking all of us, buying gifts, buying food for us, randomly photobombing us, and drawing creepy pictures of us, especially of Alyssa and him being together. I later found out that he had a hard drive of pictures of Alyssa, and that everyone else was cut off or had a huge red X over their face. The day I will always remember was the 4th of July. Sebastian invited us over to his house to celebrate by swimming, lighting fireworks, and cooking hamburgers and hot dogs. I was in charge of the chips and drinks, and everyone else was in charge of everything else. Our friend Daniel was supposed to bring the hamburger meat, but he forgot. But lo and behold, the stalker pops up out of the bush with hamburger meat. Everyone was freaked out and asked if anyone told him about our plans. Everyone said no. We were hungry, so we accepted the hamburger meat, and everything was fine until Alyssa made an announcement that her and Daniel were dating. Everyone was happy, but when I looked at the stalker, he was glaring at Daniel, and I knew he was up to something. After eating, everyone decided to relax, except for Daniel and I. We jumped into the pool together, but I was on one end, and Daniel was on the other end. I was popping up from the water, but I didn't see Daniel at first and thought he was swimming towards me to pick me up and throw me back into the water, so I decided to put on goggles and beat him to it. But what I saw was something unexpected. Daniel was swimming towards me, and halfway there, the stalker jumped into the pool on top of Daniel and stepped on him, not letting him get up, and I could see the fear in Daniel's eyes. I started to swim towards Daniel and tried to move his leg off of him, but I wasn't strong enough. I started panicking, seeing Daniel lose his breath, and decided to bite the stalker's leg, and of course he yelped and took his leg off of Daniel. I swam to the surface with Daniel and gave him mouth to mouth, and luckily Daniel coughed out the water and started breathing. He hugged me and everyone asked what happened. We told him what the stalker did, but before everyone could chew out the stalker, he was gone. Ever since that day we haven't seen him, but I'll never forget how he almost murdered someone. This happened in the winter when I was 10. I was walking to a bus stop by myself, and out of nowhere, this red car drove past me and stopped. I walked by it and a man yelled, "Hey kid." I turned and saw this guy in his early 20s. He motioned for me to come over, but I stood still. He then said, "I saw you come out of 355 Terrence Road. Was that man your dad?" I had no idea how this person knew where I lived, and I got so creeped out that I ran. I glanced back and was surprised to see that he was not following me. That night, I was finishing up some homework where I had to track the phases of the moon. I went to my window and was shocked to see the same red car parked across the street. I quickly ran to my parents sobbing and explained everything to them. I hadn't said anything earlier in the fear of getting in trouble. My dad called the cops and they arrested the man on the spot. My parents went outside to see what the hell was going on, and the dumbstruck cop explained the bizarre story the man had told them. The guy was a rookie PI that was hired by a wife who suspected her husband of having an affair. Whenever he visited the city we lived in, the husband gave his wife our address and told her that he was staying with a friend. When the police showed my parents a picture of the husband, they both laughed. The man didn't look remotely like my dad. The only thing they had in common was their dark hair and light skin. The PI was sobbing in the car, and my dad didn't press any charges because he felt bad. I live in a small town in the UK and had to get a bus into work every day. I was around 18 at the time. Early in the morning, whilst I waited for my bus, another would turn up doing a different route and stop for about 5 minutes, as it was always early. I had been using the stop for almost 2 years. One morning at the bus stop, I noticed a girl around my age on the park bus who kept looking at me and had her phone camera pointed towards me. I'd never seen her before and knew most of the people on there, as it was never busy and an early route. I thought it was a bit strange, but figured she may have just been holding her phone in a weird position, so I ignored her. However, over the next couple weeks, I would see her irregularly on the bus, but she was always looking at me and had her phone pointed to me too, holding it at a low height, as if trying to hide it. The first few times I kept ignoring it and thought maybe my hair is weird today, or maybe my makeup is. This continued for a few weeks of her turning up and watching me, even when I sat on the opposite side of the bus. Eventually I had enough, and I was getting creeped out, starting to generally believe that she was either videoing me or taking pictures. One morning I decided to get my phone out, directed it at her, and pretended to take a video. I made eye contact with her and pointed to my phone. She then put her phone away and didn't look at me again. The weirdest part is I continued to see that bus for another year and never saw her again after that. Either she was innocent and I terrified her, or she was up to something weird. My boyfriend and I were in a conversation where we were talking about the one major creepy thing that we remembered in detail to this day. After hearing his story, I was sure that he was going to look at me like I was crazy when I told him mine. His was your average ghost story. Mine was something I wish was a ghost story. It was 2012. I was 16 and working at the Worlds of Fun. It was my day off, so I decided to take my little brother to the Worlds of Fun, as we get to go in there for free since I was an employee. While on the highway, there was this car in front of me driving 10 miles under the speed limit, so I moved a lane over with the goal to pass them. When I was side by side with them, they started matching my speed. This went on for about 10 minutes. My exit was coming up, and every time I would speed up or slow down to get back over, they would match me, not letting me over. Frustrated, I looked over at the driver. At first, I only saw a bald old lady with a floral sheer scarf on her head. But when I looked down at her face, the fear, I still remember to this day. It wasn't your average old lady. I personally feel like it wasn't an old lady at all. Her face was covered in wrinkles. Her eyes were black, narrow slits. Her nose is what you see on the evil witch in Hollywood films. You know, long nose with warts. Her teeth were long and sharp, hugged by her thin lips. I remember the smile she gave me. She constantly looked at me, then back at the road, her hands aggressively shaking on the steering wheel. Each time I looked back at her, her smile got bigger and bigger. Since I was driving, I had to look back at the road, but kept looking back at her, hoping I was just seeing things. I looked at the road horrified, refusing to look back over, and asked my brother if he can look next to us. If he saw it too, then it would confirm that I'm not going crazy. Step on the gas! The second I heard the panic and fear in his voice, I moved the car into 6th gear and cut over another lane and stepped on it. At the time, I wasn't worried if I was going to pass our exit. I needed to get away from her, from that thing. Since then, I would ask my brother if he remembered that event. At first, he would mention every detail he saw of her, everything matching what I saw. He would mention the fear he felt. As the years started passing, he would slowly forget. Present day, he doesn't remember it at all. For me though, the image is burned into my brain. I haven't told this story a lot. I tried looking up different masks that would slightly resemble what I saw. No mask resembling what I saw exists. Even then, I know it wasn't a mask. Being an ex-cosmetologist, I've delved a bit into FX that could pull off what I saw. The smile, every time I looked back at her, it grew bigger and bigger, almost to devour us. I used to work in an industrial area that tends to be secluded and dark at night, with minimal lighting on the roads. I also lived close to this previous job, so I would walk home instead of taking the bus. The bus routes tend to be awkward and have long wait times, so I usually walk. One night in early October, I had been walking through a parking lot to get to my place. However, this parking lot is next to a main road where the incidents occurred. Anyway, as I'm walking through the desolate parking lot, I'm listening to music and enjoying my walk when I get a suspicious feeling that I should look behind me. I look behind and see an individual wearing a hoodie, track pants, and appears to be maybe a woman. This person is pale and seems to be watching me after emerging from the bushes she was hiding in. She picks up the pace from behind me and continues walking horizontal to me. I ran across the main road, and when I looked back, I could see her standing next to a set of trees. She then realizes that I see her watching me and jumps behind the tree to hide. I go into some random apartments to hide from her and wait there for some time. I then left and went to my place. I told my mom about the incident and she said I should have called the police. It doesn't stop there. So now it's early November. I have a weird feeling that someone is in the parking lot that I'm walking through. I was walking through a different parking lot at this time, as the previous parking lot had me freaked out because the lady had been watching me. As I'm walking through this parking lot, the person wearing the hoodie emerges from hiding behind a parked trailer, talking on her phone. I am thoroughly freaked out and decide to pick up my pace and get to the main road as fast as possible without alerting this person that I felt threatened by them. As I'm getting ready to cross the road, this person decides to cross the road as well and watches me as I cross the road. I book it into the random apartment and hide until I assume that she was gone. Now, the last time this happened was mid-November, a week after the second incident. I am walking through the same parking lot that I had saw her the second time. Dumb, I know. This time, she emerges from hiding behind the trailer and starts walking towards me. I decide to just run to the main road. I get across the main road and look back, and she's gone. I assume that she must have been hiding behind the trailer, as there's no way she could have gotten out of the parking lot in that time. I decide to hide in that same apartment building. Now, I have not seen her since it's been snowing, so it would be significantly easier to see her face, and it's too cold to wait in the parking lot. I also no longer work there, so I no longer have to take that route to work. It could have been a man as they were pretty tall, but I thought I heard her voice when she was talking on the phone. And when I saw her the first time, I thought she might have been a white female with dark hair. I have not gone to the police with this information, but might. I doubt it would do anything, but my mom thinks it might. I go to university 2 hours away by ferry from the mainland where my family lives. Sometimes on weekends I go to visit them, which would require me to take a 23-kilometer bus ride to the ferry terminal. This bus ride was usually very boring and long, so I would try to make the best of it. Where I live, we have double-decker buses, and I would always sit on top and listen to music. One Friday, on the way to my terminal, I was on the top level as usual when a man who looked to be about 40 came up to sit. I made note of his presence, but didn't think much of him other than that. He looked pretty beat up, shaggy hair, stained brown hoodie, a silver chain on his neck, but I try not to judge. It's important to note at the time, I was 18 years old and am a small female. I don't ever want to be hyper aware, judgmental, but I was brought up to always take note of who's around me, particularly men, just for my safety. The man sat multiple rows ahead of me, and in the beginning was initially minding his own business. I was just listening to music and looking out the window, minding mine. It wasn't until partway into the trip that I noticed that he had moved a row closer to me. Weird, but whatever. Maybe his seat was dirty or something. He then proceeded to move closer and closer until he was a seat directly in front of me. It's important to note that the top level of the bus only had him and me in it. Suffice to say, I was getting uncomfortable. Still giving him the benefit of the doubt, I decided to phone a friend and have a conversation just to break up the uncomfortable silence. I text my friend, SOS, which we do when we need the other to call us for whatever reason. He calls me and starts a normal conversation. It was at that point that the man decides that he wanted to start talking to me. I tell my friend to hold on, and I take out my earbud to hear what he's saying. He starts asking me if I know any good places to get a haircut, and I say I don't. I start to put my earbuds back in when he asks, "What's a girl like you taking the bus alone?" It wasn't late yet, but it was getting dark, so maybe he was just concerned about my safety. I told him that I was going to the ferry terminal. Everyone on the bus is, and try to put my earbuds back in. He continues on, telling me his whole life story, about how he was in the military, how his kids don't talk to him, showed me his dog tags, and told me he rides the bus back and forth every day just to have something to do. He has no intention of taking the ferry though. This is important for later. He's growing increasingly annoyed that I'm not reciprocating the conversation. He tells me it's quite rude to ignore people when they're just trying to have a friendly conversation. At this point, I'm starting to get quite creeped out. I politely informed him that I'm not trying to ignore him, but I'm on the phone with someone and would like to resume my conversation. This irritates him, and he asks who I'm calling, to which I respond, "A good friend." He notices the male name on the phone and makes a weird face. He tells me to hang up and then asks to see my phone to find a hair salon where he can get his haircut cheaply, which I obviously refused. I then try to get up and try to move to the bottom level of the bus so that I'm not secluded with this weirdo upstairs alone anymore. My friend on the phone has no clue what's going on. As I collected my stuff and started moving, the guy tries to tell me that it's not my stop yet, but I ignore him. I go down to the front of the lower level and stand near the bus driver until we reach the final stop. The man came downstairs and seated himself close by, but did not try to talk to me further. I thought it was over, but no. I reach the terminal, pay for my ticket, and go into the waiting area. You can't enter the waiting area unless you have proof of a ticket purchase. Well, guess who comes down the escalator? Mr. Dog Tags himself. My heart sank. There's a couple people in the waiting area, so I wasn't too afraid about my immediate safety, but I was more worried about having to be trapped on a ferry boat with this guy for 2 hours. He paced up and down the walkway outside the washrooms, repeatedly checking to see if I had moved, briefly ducking into the men's room and coming back out after a couple minutes. He goes up and down the escalators a few times and continued to try to catch my eye, either smiling or just staring. I had enough at this point and started looking for other passengers that I could sit with for security. I see a woman in her mid-40s and my teenage instinct to seek maternal security kicks in. I bring my bag and politely ask the woman if I could sit with her. I quietly explain what's happening and this woman goes into full mama bear. Bless her soul. She told me that she had noticed the man too and got a bad feeling. She has 2 daughters around my age. She insisted that I sit with her on the ferry, just in case. The girl sitting across from us in the seating area overheard and offered her support as well. We boarded the ferry together, and I didn't notice the man as we boarded. I assumed that he had just left the terminal, as he said he never intended to catch the ferry in the first place. As we are sitting on the ferry, my heart drops when I see the man coming towards our seating area. The nice mom assures me that she'll handle it if he dares to approach us, but he notices that I'm not alone anymore, and I guess decides to do a lap instead. We later saw him trying to bother another young girl, but luckily for her, her boyfriend returned from the food line and the guy took off pretty fast. For the rest of the ferry, he was just sort of lurking, checking in to see if I had gotten up or left my group. I did not, even though I had to pee real bad. Not worth it. The girl we were with eventually flags down a ferry worker and informs him of this suspicious person, and Dog Tag hightails it to the other side of the vessel. When we reached the other side, the mom insisted on walking me directly to my dad's car in the pickup zone before leaving the terminal herself, and that was the end of it. I wish that woman nothing but wonderful things in her life. She was so kind and protective. I generally don't know how the evening would have played out without her. I don't know what the man's plan was, don't want to know. But being followed on 2 forms of transportation is definitely a new one for me. I'm only 17 and work a second shift at my local movie theater. This will be relevant later. It was Friday night. My weekend had just begun. I was on Xbox Live playing Overwatch and eating some now cold pizza like lots of my friends were. I was kicking considerable ass, more than I usually was at this game, and I was on fire for 3 matches. At around 2 a.m. I decided to step up my game and go into competitive mode. I got into a match at King's Row and I was playing Farah on defense. I got a 15-player kill streak, but I noticed 5 of those kills were on the same guy, Bastion. I remember his username. The match goes on for another minute and then I get an invite to a party. The gamer tag was the same as Bastion. I had just killed for the 6th time. I wasn't in a party since all my friends had called it a night except for me at that point. I decided that whatever he wanted to say could be interesting, so I added him. Now, I usually expect some kids a few years younger than me to be shit talking, but to my surprise, it was a grown man on the other end. More to my surprise, he sounded to be in his 30s rather than close to my age, and he had a thick Spanish accent. Immediately, this guy starts cussing me out. I can't lie when I say I half expected this to happen when I got the party invite. Now, I have the mentality where if you're going to be a jerk to me, I'll return the favor. I replied with the classic, "Oh, you mad, bro?" This guy doesn't acknowledge what I said. Instead of saying fuck my mom, like most people did, this guy just said, "Fuck you, your entire family. I'll make sure to decapitate your mother and make your dad fuck her down the goddamn neck." I sort of was shocked by all this, but it didn't last. Bro, take a fucking chill pill. "No, I want you to." He stopped, and I noticed why. A diva on our team had just killed his Bastion hero again. Now this is where things get scary. It sounded as if he turned into a rabid animal and was trying to suffocate himself on the mic and screaming and howling and spitting all at the same time. It's difficult to describe exactly what the sounds he was making, but that's the closest I can do. Inhumane noises coming from this person, as if he was being gutted and possessed by a demon at the same time. It was a grown man too, which made the entire thing scary compared to me laughing my ass off when a 12-year-old loses it. The match ended. The enemy team didn't even get to the payload moving. The man loses his shit some more because he lost. Then I decide to be an asshole again and not take this clearly crazy shit. Look, it's not my fault that you suck at the game. You're just being treated like the child you are. Grow the fuck up, man. This guy did not like this. He just hollered, "Fuck you," into his mic for no joke 20 seconds. It started getting all crackly. He was being so loud, he was breaking his mic. He then removed me from his party. I decided, since the match was over, to call it a night, just like my friends had. My overall reaction to what went down was, okay, that was something. I logged out, turned off my Xbox, and went to bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I realized how much of a dumbass I was for not recording any of it. My friends would have fucking lost it when they heard that. Then I fell asleep. Saturday went by with nothing, and I thought that was that with the pissed off Spanish guy. On Sunday, I logged onto my Xbox that morning to play more Overwatch. I noticed I had a message from the guy saying, "Good morning, insert my full name. I know you have to go to, insert the movie theater address I work at, tomorrow." What the fuck? I said aloud. I decided to pull out my phone and take a picture of my TV screen. I then texted my boss about it and told her that some guy on Xbox somehow found out where I worked. Now, my boss is a bitchy old lady, so she naturally didn't care what happened on Xbox. Even though it concerned my work, she just blew it off and told me I still had to come in the next day. Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and Incredibles 2 are both out right now, so we were going to be busy. I ended up coming in the next day at 5:30. It was pretty boring and busy like I predicted, up until 8 o'clock when a super short guy came through the door. It was loud and pretty crowded, but this guy fucking hollers my full name. Same thick Spanish accent from Xbox. Oh fuck, it was him. I still to this day don't know where he got my info from, or why he decided to come all the way out to where I worked. The theater fell silent, and I walked into the back room where my boss was and told her that the guy from Xbox was inside. She repeated the whole, "I don't care what happens to you on Xbox. Get back to work, we're busy." I repeated to her that the guy was inside the building. I don't know if he wanted to hurt me or not, and that I was going to call the cops. I ended up actually calling the cops. It wasn't until they arrived and spoke with me privately in the back room that my boss ended up taking me seriously. Spanish guy was still in the lobby, and the cops put him in cuffs and walked him out. This is according to my boss, as I was still in the back room and didn't witness it. I still haven't heard anything from the cops, and I still don't know how he found out my info or why he came all this way to where I work. I still don't know what he planned to do to me. Either way, I'm still a bit shaken up over it. I don't know if he knows my home address or not, and I'm pretty much on guard 24/7. Either way, I own 2 dogs that can scare anyone off, but I'm still pretty terrified of this guy. So, insane pissed off guy from Xbox Live that stalks teenagers and visits them. I hope I never have to meet you again. Update. I contacted my police department and I heard they had taken the guy on Monday, so I have satisfaction of knowing he didn't get away. They're still being stingy with the information and won't even tell me his name because all the security garbage. I'm waiting for the full police report on this. They promised that they would give me one soon. I don't know how long it will be, but I'm just gonna try not to focus on this guy right now.
So I lived in a pretty nice area with my husband and some family friends. We lived there for a few years with nothing bad happening around us. It felt like a very safe neighborhood. Now for context, I'm a very short female and considered disabled, even though I look fine. But I could never really beat anyone up since my disability has limited my activity severely. Anyways, on to the story. This happened about a year before we moved in. I had some stories pop up on Facebook of some traffickers that were targeting women and children at the local store we lived right behind. I was freaked out, and so I made a point not to go to the store without my husband. I still got the news article about people being followed and grabbed and kidnapped from the store, but I felt pretty safe as long as I didn't go anywhere without my husband. I was going to work one day. I worked about 15 minutes away from our house. It was a call center kind of out in the middle of nowhere. There were fields every which way. I worked the afternoon shift and was one of the last people to leave at night. I had to stop and get gas and was a little freaked out because I was scared to go anywhere without my husband. But I wasn't going to make it to work and back home, so I had no choice. So I stopped at the gas station and was slightly relieved that it was super busy. I got out and started pumping my gas when this big van pulled up in the spot next to mine. The guy got out and started pumping his own gas. He then walked around the pump and got between my car and I. He smiled and said, "Wow, your car is so clean. How do you get it so clean?" I was flabbergasted at the question. My car was a mess. It was dirty with bugs and stuff on it. "Why don't you show me how you get it so clean?" He reached out to touch me, but I jerked back. Another car pulled up behind me and a guy got out. I think he freaked the other guy out because he walked back to his van. I quickly finished pumping my gas and got into my car. I locked the doors and sped away. A few minutes later, I look out of my window and the van is behind me, pretty much riding my bumper. I could see the guy smiling and laughing with some other guy. I was pretty freaked out, but figured he was just going to the freeway. We passed the freeway, but he kept following me, and at this point I was very freaked out. The only place on this road now is my work. I called my husband, but he didn't answer since he was at work. I was freaking out, so I just picked up the speed and continued to work. I kept looking back, and the van was still there, only just a bit farther away. I made it to work. It was a large building with lots of cars in the parking lot. I parked right in front of the doors in a handicapped spot and ran straight in. I looked back through the locked doors and saw the guy stopped in front, looking really pissed off. I ran up to my department and went right up to a friend who was ex-military. He carried multiple guns on him at all times. I cried as I told him what happened. I got to work and was still freaked out all day. We closed up, and as I was walking down to my car, I took a peek out of the window and saw the white van. I couldn't see anyone in there, and I wasn't even sure it was the same van. I ran back to my department and told my friend what was going on. He pulled out his gun and walked me outside. The van had now moved to right behind my car. My friend walked me to his car. We got in and he drove me right to my car. He then followed me all the way home and sat outside until I was inside the house. I could see the van following us, but once we passed the freeway, it turned onto it. The next afternoon on my way to work, I passed the gas station and the van pulled out. Again, they followed me to work, but they turned away once I got to the parking lot. This went on for about a week. They would follow me to work, leave, and then be outside when I was leaving. My friend would always walk me out. My buddy told me they were probably trying to learn my schedule so they could figure out a time to jump me. He insisted I take one of his guns just in case he wasn't there to walk me out. I didn't want it though, as I was afraid that if I had one, I would get pulled over for something mundane and then get into trouble for having a gun not in my name and not having a permit for it. I was telling my husband that evening about how this man was still following me. He suggested that I should call the cops and let them know. I honestly don't know why I didn't think of that. So the next morning when I was about to get ready for work, I called. I told them everything and then I left for work. Just like clockwork, the van pulled out at the gas station and started following me. We were on the long stretch of road that nothing was on when I spotted a car parked off to the side of the road. I passed and then the car passed, and then the parked car's lights came on. It was the police. The van was pulled over. I later found out that the men following me had several warrants for sexual assault and attempted kidnapping. The back of the van had knives, rope, gloves, masks, chloroform, and some other sketchy shit in it. The cops believed that I was going to be their next target. When I got to work, my friend wasn't there. He was sick. I'm so glad I called the cops that morning, because I don't think I would have made it home if he wasn't there to walk me out. We have since moved out and live in an area that's not as nice, but so far I haven't noticed any creepy people around. But now I always carry pepper spray whenever I go out. Ever since I can remember, I've always been afraid of white utility vans with blocked out back windows. In 6th grade, I used to pick up my sister, who was in 1st grade. I'd then walk to the restaurant our mom worked at to hang out for a while and eat some dinner while she was on shift. One day, as we were walking out of our apartment complex and approached the gate, one of these creepy vans pulled in and blocked the gate off. He was not trying to exit, he was purposely blocking our path. We slowed down and the driver hopped out of his car, walked around to the passenger side, opened his back door, and then started coming towards us. I immediately freaked out, grabbed my sister's hand, and yelled, "Run." We ran back to our apartment as the guy got back into his car and followed us. I locked us in the apartment. My sister and I hid in our room and stayed really quiet, and then there was a knock at the door. We both started crying. I called my mom, but since she was working, she didn't answer right away. And then I got the guts to look out the window in the living room, and sure enough, the white van was parked outside. Later on, I spoke to my mom about it on the phone. She didn't really believe me. When she got home, there was a piece of paper stuck in the door. There was no writing or anything on it. It was so strange. This story takes place when I was 17, in a small bordered town I grew up in. I lived in a house on a steep hill, and I took the bus every day to and from school. Classes started very early, and no other students lived on my small street. It must have been during the winter because it was very cold every morning, which wasn't a usual thing where I lived. I remember being afraid every morning because it was very dark outside. I only had the light of the moon to guide me, and back then, cell phones didn't have flashlights that you could use to guide your way in the dark. There were only 3 other houses on my small street, and they were all on a big hill with paved driveways going down, and they met on a gravelly road. The houses were arranged on a gravel cul-de-sac, which many people used to turn around if they went down the wrong road. I lived in a desert area, so there were leafless mesquite trees and cactus around, to where it was very reminiscent of a forest or dense flora area. It was so quiet that all you could hear were the bats fluttering around the one streetlight that decided to work on the off day, but usually it was just pitch black, along with the yapping of coyotes and crickets chirping. Other than that, all I could hear was the crunching of gravel beneath my feet. The first time I saw the man in the van, I wasn't that surprised. A lot of the time we would get these white vans passing through because they delivered papers to the surrounding houses. I then started to realize that this van would stop right next to me when I was standing alone, waiting for the bus to arrive. There was a stop sign there, but there was no reason for the person in the van to be stopped there for like 10 minutes until the bus picked me up. He must have started to get brave, because after that, he would roll his window down and ask me if I was cold. I'd say yes and ignore his presence. I'd pretend like nothing happened. I just figured he was trying to be nice to me. He was an older man in his 70s. Again the next day he pulls up even closer to me. "Are you cold? You look beautiful today. You look so cold." This time I just ignored him and waited for the bus to pull up and got in. I would watch his van pull away after my bus left. He kept doing this for 2 weeks until one day he looked at me through his window and said, "I could use a pretty girl like you. It's cold outside. You must be so cold. Come inside my van and I'll keep you warm until your bus gets here." I looked at him in horror, and luckily the bus pulled up a few seconds later. I decided I needed to tell someone about him. My dad is in law enforcement, and I told him what had been happening. He asked me what the guy looked like and when the van would pull up. He said I should have told him sooner, but he's glad I told him when I did. He called the police and I told them what had been happening. They said they had similar reports in the area, and that they would catch him. The next day, the police hid behind me, where the cul-de-sac is, and I stood in my usual spot where I stood for the bus. I remember that day, the streetlight was finally working, and I could see the man's face in the van. He didn't realize the officer was there until he made a full turn around the cul-de-sac and started towards me. The police turned their lights on and pulled him over. I could hear him yelling as the bus pulled in and I left for school. I could see the police lights glaring on the bus windows. The next day my dad sat me down and said he needed to talk to me. Apparently the man had many suspicious things in the van. He had duct tape, plastic bags, zip ties, trash bags, a machete, and some other strange things. He claimed to be a newspaper man and he would distribute the newspapers to my neighbors, yet the police never found one newspaper in his van when they searched it. My dad ran a background check on him and he had his CD passed. I'm not sure whatever happened to the man legally, but he never showed his face on the street again. But whenever I stood at the end of the street, all I could think about is if he had gotten the courage to step out of his van, that I would have no way to defend myself, and no one would have heard from me again. I was around 8 or 9 when this happened. I went to visit my grandparents on the other side of town. They lived 5 minutes away from an elementary school, and I would often walk to it and play on the playground. A young family with a daughter my age lived right next door, and we would play together whenever I came over. One day we decided to take a walk after having fun at the park. We still had energy and dinner wasn't ready yet, so we wandered through the neighborhood. We were laughing and picking flowers along the way when I noticed a white van. We continued our walk, and before you know it, I'd completely forgotten all about it. My friend had stopped to tie her shoe, and I was looking around for more flowers to pick when I realized that we had gone a lot further than we ever had before. I didn't recognize the houses in front of me, and it was going to get dark soon. As soon as the thought enters my mind, I see the white van rounding the corner, heading towards us. My stomach sank. It was the same van from earlier, but something seemed different. They stopped in the middle of the road and stared at us. I tell my friend that we need to go, and I ask her if she recognizes the houses around us, or the van in front of us. She doesn't. I tell her that we should probably head home, and she agrees. The van then drives past us slowly, and the man in the passenger seat rolls down the window. "Do you girls know where Applegate Street is?" he asks us. We both say no, and I get a good look at the van. It has a picture of a vacuum on the side and a company name I don't remember. He tells us that they're cleaning houses in the neighborhood, and they can't find the street they're looking for. I know I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, so I grab my friend's hand and tell the men I'm sorry, but no we don't, and keep walking. We begin our walk home, and my uneasy feeling grows stronger every step of the way. We were going back the same way we came when I start to recognize the houses. We're about 10 minutes away, and then I hear it, the van coming down the street behind us. I tell my friend to grab a rock from the path, because now I'm sure they're following us. I'm scared, but I know we're not too far from my grandparents' house. We can get there faster if we run, so that's what we do. Picture 2 terrified 8-year-olds running down the street with softball-sized rocks in their hands. I look back and see the van racing after us. I can hear someone yelling. It's the man driving, and I hear the word directions. I stop because I'm out of breath, and I think maybe that's all they wanted. I was probably just overreacting, but boy was I wrong. As soon as I stop, my friend does too. So does the van. I get a good look at the driver this time. He's explaining that all they wanted was directions, but I know that something's wrong, and before I get the words out, the sliding door of the van opens and a man in the back is coming towards us. We throw the rocks at him and run as fast as we can to my grandparents' house. When we get inside, we start crying our eyes out. My mom had apparently arrived when we were gone. I run to her and my grandma and tell them what happened. She runs outside, yelling at my grandma to call the cops while she looks for the van. She sees it parked 2 houses down and charges at it like a bull. I had run out after her, so I'm standing there screaming. My mom is tiny, but she's fierce and in mama bear mode. The van starts to pull away, and I'll never forget what happened next. She jumped on the hood of the van and starts beating on the window. They stop and she yells that she's making a citizen's arrest and that they need to stop their car. They act like they're going to, and they slowly pull over and park. She gets off of the hood, and as soon as she does, they race off. Thank God she managed to remember their license plate. When the police got there, they ask us so many questions, and I try to explain everything that happened from the first moment I saw them. They run the license plate number, and it comes back as out of state. They say I can go now, and they want to speak to my mom alone. When she comes back inside, I hear her talking to my grandma in the kitchen. What she said makes my blood run cold to this day. The man who owned the car, he was linked to a kidnapping out of state and had a bolo out for his arrest. The police ended up arresting all 3 men. We had to go in to give an official statement. My friend, my mom, and I picked all 3 of them out of the lineup. They were charged with kidnapping out of state and/or attempted kidnapping. I never went walking in my grandparents' neighborhood after that, and I still cringe when I see a white van. And that's when I realize there's a reason for the creepy white van stories after all. A couple of years ago, I worked at this 24-hour diner. Sometimes I worked the night shift. One day I was at Walmart after an afternoon shift I worked, in my really painfully recognizable uniform. The guy in front of me had these crazy eyes and was taking his sweet time bagging up his groceries, and then he said hi. So I just said hi back. And then he said, "Oh, you work at Max's Diner?" I replied back to him and confirmed it. He left the store. I bagged my groceries and walked out a couple of minutes later. Well, the guy was outside and saw me get into my car. He didn't follow me though, or so I thought. And that was the end of that. So fast forward 2 weeks. I'm working the night shift and it's 2 a.m. I was sitting outside smoking a cigarette and talking on the phone. This white van pulls up and guess who hops out? He said to me, "Hey girl, I've been looking for you. Do you remember me?" His eyes were bugging out of his head and he had a few buddies in his van. I stuck my phone in my pocket and he grabbed my wrist and started pulling me to the van. And then he said, "Come hang out with us." I said, "Fuck no, dude." I yanked away and started backing towards the door. He kept asking if he could at least get my number. I just ran inside to the back and told my almost 7-foot tall co-worker, but by the time he went to investigate, they drove off. 2 nights later, one of the windows was shot out with a BB gun during a night shift that I wasn't working, but my coworker said it was a bunch of guys who drove by in a white van.
I'm a female. A few years ago, when I was 26, I used to work a job where I wouldn't get off until about 11 p.m. I didn't mind it for the most part. I'm a night owl by nature, but I read a lot of Let's Not Meet and watch a lot of horror movies. I wouldn't say that I'm paranoid, but I'm definitely cautious. This particular night, I was driving home along one of the main roads. It was late enough that the traffic was fairly scarce, but not so late that I felt like I was the only one out, especially because there was a Jeep behind me for a good while at this point. When it came time to make my first turn, the Jeep followed. This wasn't particularly unusual. I was still on a big road, so I didn't think anything of it. I needed to get gas, and luckily, there was a fairly busy and well-lit station on my way home. I feel like the layout is important, so please bear with me. From the road that I was on, you had to take a left onto a side street, then turn right onto a side street that runs parallel with a grocery store. And then you turn right again to get into the gas station. It's a very specific destination, and there's no through traffic. When I went to make the first left, the Jeep got into the turn lane with me. This is where I started paying attention. They had already been behind me for a good 10 to 15 minutes, and it seemed unlikely that they were just coincidentally going to the same gas station as me, considering how many there were in the area. But like I said, there's a grocery store that's open 24 hours, so maybe that's where they were going. However, they still followed me when I turned into the gas station. I pulled up to one of the pumps in the middle lane, put my car in park, and watched the Jeep in my rearview. There was no way in hell I was getting out of my car until I figured out what they were doing. If they pulled up to the pump and started getting gas, I'd laugh at myself and carry on. They didn't pull up to a pump. They looked at the back lot, just idling in place for close to a minute. Finally, they started slowly driving around to the far end of the pumps until they stopped again in front of my car, maybe 15 feet away. Unfortunately, they had tinted windows, so I couldn't see who was in the car or what they were doing, but after another brief period of time, they just drove off. I got gas and drove home, keeping an eye out, but didn't see them again. Edit. I just realized something that honestly made me sick to my stomach. If I hadn't decided to get gas that night, and if they were in fact following me, my next turn would have taken me into a very large, very dark, very empty park. It takes almost 5 minutes to drive through and has a million speed bumps, so there isn't a quick escape. I hate thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't stopped. Maybe this doesn't count as creepy, and I'm reading into it too much, but I still think it's weird, and it really freaked me out at the time. I have no idea what they were doing. Were they following me? Was it just a coincidence after all? I'll never know for sure, but thanks. I hated it. I don't even know how to begin this. I guess I'll start from where I believe is the beginning, but I can assure you that it was the first time I saw him. I will keep the details pretty vague regarding where this happened, as not to dox myself. I know I have pictures of my face on Reddit, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my name or the city I lived in at the time. Let's just say it was a very European city, very central, and cosmopolitan. When I was about 15 years old, I was extremely interested in philosophy books. I didn't feel like I could talk to my friends about the subject without boring them, so when this man approached me on the street with a pamphlet about Plato classes, I was pretty excited. He was about 28 to 30 years old, very tall, skinny, and crazy eyes. I remember I was a smartass and thought that reading two of his most well-known books made me interesting, so we started debating. It was nice to have a conversation that lasted about 10 minutes, but it was getting late, so I left it at that. He told me his name, but I honestly can't remember. A couple days later, I found him on the same street at a totally different time. It was always very crowded, so I wasn't especially spooked about it. I was getting out of the subway after classes. Mind you, I took this same route every day until I graduated high school. I didn't live on that street, but that's where I got out of the subway and then waited for a bus that would get me home. I thought it was a pretty cool coincidence that the philosophy guy was at the subway door. This time he didn't have any pamphlets, he just had a lollipop in his hand. And I know it sounds cliche, but it was so eerie to see a 6-foot guy licking his lollipop and staring straight at me. He said hi, and I said hi back. He tried to get the conversation going, but I could feel this weird energy in the air, so I decided to cut the conversation short. I'd see him once or twice a week, and just assumed that he lived there, and happened to be going for a walk at the same time as I was getting home. I honestly believe that this weird guy, twice my age, just happened to find his way to me so many times. That was until I saw him in my neighborhood. I was having a coffee with a friend, and she was telling me that she met a cool guy while playing volleyball on the beach. When the guy, I shit you not, just appeared out of nowhere. He approached my friend, and they talked for a bit. Yes, he was the guy that she was talking about. He seemed mildly surprised that we were friends, but didn't give it much thought, so I didn't either. When he left, I started feeling uneasy, but my friend thought he was cool, so I didn't voice my concerns. There's this thing about teenage girls that makes them think that they're very mature for their age. So we just assumed that he had befriended us separately and then found out they were friends. At the time, none of us had social media, apart from WhatsApp, so I still can't understand how he managed to insert himself into my friend group. Eventually, my friend left to study abroad, and the subject died. I would see dude now and then on the same street of my commute, but we would only speak for a few minutes, and that's it. This went on for about 6 months. Sometimes he would pretend that he didn't know who I was, but would still approach me saying that I looked familiar. Sometimes he would greet me very warmly. Looking back, I guess he was dealing with some kind of mental health issue. Slowly, he was getting bolder. One time, he asked for my number and tried to hug me. I could feel that something was very wrong, but at the same time, I thought I was being the weird one, and that he was just a nice dude. Still, I gave him a fake number. This other time, we went to church on a school trip, and he was waiting outside, talking to my peers. He played it cool, saying that he had seen my face somewhere, but he was not sure. As if I hadn't been seeing him almost every week for a year now. I was very stupid. I never thought about talking to my parents about this. After all, the guy was not violent, he was not mean. In my head, it was just a lonely man who happened to have a strangely similar routine. I started to be scared though. I looked behind my back when I was alone at night. I avoided dark streets. I was kind of paranoid, but still, I ignored my gut feeling and shoved it to the back of my mind. After all, as long as I gave him a few minutes of my day when he called out for me, everything would be fine. When I turned 17, I stopped seeing him. I think this went on for about a year. It was a relief, honestly. I could sense that what happened was bizarre, but I explained it to my friends like it was funny, like it was a joke. Eventually, I started attending college, so my everyday route changed. I stayed in the same city though. One day, I had to go through the same street again. I can't remember why. I just know that I was walking, minding my own business. It was maybe 9 p.m., and then I turned around the corner, and there he was. He saw me, smiled, and said he was lost, and asked for directions. I swear to God, I felt primal fear at that moment. I felt like I was dealing with a truly insane person. We had crossed each other's paths for 2 years straight in this exact same place, and he was acting as if he didn't know me or the intersection. Something about that fucked with my mind for a while. I kept walking. I didn't look at him, didn't utter a single word. And then he lost his shit. For the first time, I saw who he really was. He tried to grab my arm and screamed that I was the biggest bitch ever. He said he hoped my mom died from cancer. He said he would kill me. I know I was not alone as there were still quite a few people outside, but no one said anything. He kept screaming his lungs out, and I just started running. I ran and I cried. That was the last time I ever saw him, 2 years ago. He has long since stopped trying to talk to my friend. No one knows who he is. I can't remember his name to go to the police and file a report. It's like my mind tried to erase him. He was a stellar stalker though, because I only understood that that's what he was years after the fact. I'm grateful I'm safe. For some context, this whole thing started in 2005. I was 14 and ended in 2011 when I was 20. In the summer and fall of 2005, my grandparents had moved into a tiny mobile home park, kind of in between two small towns. At the end of the road that they lived on, a shopping center was still being built at the time, and there was only one Target store. Being as I stay at my grandparents' home quite often, think 3 to 5 times a week, and there was only one store out there, we were there quite frequently. Not specific employees ever stood out to us, nor do I remember ever seeing. Let's call him Alvin. Within a few months, a Save Mart, if you're not from California, it's just your basic grocery store, was added to the shopping center, now making 2 stores out there. And naturally, the Save Mart had cheaper groceries than Target, so we began shopping there instead. This is where Alvin made himself known, whether he intended to or not. I can't tell you how many times I would go down random aisles, and this dude would just show up. At first, he would act like he was just restocking the shelves or cleaning, but eventually he would just stand there and stare at me. He would do this in every aisle we went into. Then, as we would leave, he would refuse to let anyone else bag the groceries for us, and he would still bag our groceries and follow us to our car, even if we refused the help. This went on for months, until just as quickly as he made himself known, he quickly disappeared. Or at least we thought. As time went on, things were quiet, and I eventually started seeing Alvin again around the Safe Mart, but he no longer did the weird shit like before. And around 2009-2010, I got into more of the internet and social media scene, and became quite into the site called My Yearbook, and was actually quite popular on there, and would get multiple friend requests a day. So when I got requested from a guy named Alvin, given I never knew the guy's name, no alarm bells went off. I would frequently exchange phone numbers and sometimes meet people from my yearbook, and eventually became texting with Alvin. For over a year we texted, and nothing more, but we were able to have a good flow of conversation and talked about life. I found out he worked at SafeMart and tried to figure out which one, so that maybe one day when I was running around I could stop off and say hi or something, but he kept refusing, so I let it go. Eventually, New Year's Eve 2010 rolled around, and I was having a party with my best friend and her brothers and a few other friends, and invited Alvin. He tried to say that he worked late and didn't know if he could make it, but I was determined to get him over to the party. I talked him into showing up, and when he did, I instantly regretted it. My best friend and her brothers, let's call them Lee, Randy, and RJ, knew about the guy and how weird he had been. When he showed up and I realized who he was, I did my best to enjoy the party without interacting with him. My friend's brother, who I kinda had a thing with, stayed right next to me, but so did Alvin. And the whole night, no matter how many times my friends tried to interact with him and get him away from me, he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't speak to them or even acknowledge them. He literally stood there and stared at me the whole time. And besides, saying hello when he came in, had not even said another word to me. It came down to midnight. We did this countdown where Randy and I made a big show about kissing, and I was thinking that would throw him off. It didn't. He stared even when that happened. And finally, Lee and RJ came up with a plan to pretend that all of us were going to bed now, and then told him that he needed to leave. Luckily he did, and again, just like before, he seemed to disappear. Around November I had gotten my first job, which afforded me to buy a car. Grandma and I were still shopping at the Safe Mart, but Alvin wasn't bothering us, except for occasionally seeing him around the store, where he would speak to my grandma, but not to me. This particular day though, he hadn't followed us at all, and I thought us leaving would go over without an appearance from him. I was wrong. He came over and began bagging our stuff, even though we said no, and then began not only following us to the car, but began talking to my grandma, and only her, about how I needed to apply at Target because when they first opened, he worked there, and if I put him on my application as a reference, I'd get the job. Of course, I had seen through his manipulation tactic, but my grandma, unfortunately not so much. She kept going on and on about how I should do it, so I explained to her everything that had happened, and not only did that shut her up, but she took my side. Long story short, I applied without his reference and got the job, but had to turn it down because I got a better opportunity. Anyways, he began following me around the store again, and I a few times would say hi, just to let him know that I knew he was there. Eventually, he did ask me to hang out under the guise of it being a group hangout with him and some of his coworkers. It was all a lie. When I showed up, which was my biggest mistake, but I was a bored 20-year-old, and my boyfriend at the time encouraged me to go because he wanted me to make more friends, but it was only him. I sat at the table at the donut shop for around 20 minutes before I made an excuse and left. He asked me to hang out again about a month later, and since he stopped following me around the store and acted semi-normal the last time, I agreed. We met at Starbucks. Around 9:30 they closed, and I walked to my car, thinking, cool, that's that, I can go home now. But nope, he invited me to his house. I said no, but he also said that his mom had homemade cookies and stuff there and wanted to meet me. So I thought fine, I'll get a cookie and leave. Bro, he told his parents and siblings that I was his girlfriend. The whole time I kept correcting them, telling him no, I already had a boyfriend and Alvin was not him. They just kept ignoring it, so I panicked and hid in the bathroom on the phone with my then boyfriend, trying to figure out how to get out of there. My boyfriend said to say that there's an emergency and leave, and come straight to his house. I did just that, and all night Alvin wouldn't stop texting me and tagged me in some random Facebook post about love and relationships. I blocked him on all the socials I had back then and turned off my phone. I went to bed thinking never again. He began not only following me around the store, but if I was out anywhere, he would show up there. Like one day I was getting snacks and an energy drink at a convenience store, and in he came. His excuse, I saw your car outside and wanted to say hi to you. And that wasn't the first or only time he did that. Finally, my boyfriend and my boyfriend's dad threatened him to make him leave me alone, to which he sent me a long text about how me not being with him was a mistake because he was apparently a child's pastor and owned his own house. He also later on in the text he sent admitted to not only having unprotected sex, but having it with underage girls in his youth group. What the fuck? No, just absolutely no. He again disappeared at Save Mart. at least for me. When my grandma and grandpa would go in without me, he would relentlessly hound them about how he had a large bank account and how his parents bought a house for him and that they needed to make me break up with my boyfriend and be with him. When my grandpa exploded on him one day about leaving me alone, he then started in about, well, she has a sister and I can date her. My sister was a minor at the time. At this point is where both my grandparents filed complaints against him to his supervisor, and they learned that this wasn't his first. Multiple female employees had either complained about his sexual harassment or left the job completely because of Alvin. Luckily, this led to him getting fired, and I haven't seen him since. Last I heard through the grapevine is that he knocked up one of those teenage girls in his youth group and married her. So Alvin, I hope we never meet again. My dad was always busy with work, and my school was kind of far away, so my dad bought me a bicycle for school. One day, I was going to school in the morning, and this guy, I think he was in his early 20s, started following me with his bicycle to my school. I didn't pay too much attention to this, as I was a kid, 12 years old, but it started happening regularly. He never talked, but he was always there following me, and had this creepy grin on his face. After some time, I saw that he was always around my house. Whenever I would go out, he was there to follow me. I changed my paths, but he always found me. I was so scared all the time, and I never felt safe. One day, he tried to touch me, and that's when I told my dad, and then the police caught him when he was following me again. I'm so glad I've never seen that guy again. So for starters, I'm a white girl who lives in the middle of nowhere in Japan, so I stand out quite a lot. About 2 weeks ago, I decided to go watch a movie and get some shopping done. Because it's very cold where I live and I only had summer clothes. Since the closest theater and mall is about an hour away, I wanted to make the most of my trip and ended up seeing Joker around 9 p.m. after I did some shopping. Everything up until after the movies was fine, and I had no problems. However, when I went to see the movie, I took notice of this guy that was sitting directly behind me. I thought, whatever, because he probably just bought the seat behind me because he liked being in the back of the theater. Also, after movies in Japan, it's very common for everyone to stay seated until the end of the credits, but because it was late and I had to drive back home, I didn't want to wait and got up from my seat. As soon as I got up, the dude behind me got up too. We made weird eye contact, and he just seemed a bit off, but I also didn't think too much of it because it was late. After, I walked to the bathroom and the guy was walking slowly behind me and stopped outside of the bathroom and waited, all by himself, and he watched me go in. Okay, now that was weird, I thought. So, because I was a little freaked out by this guy at this point, I decided to stay in the bathroom for a little bit longer to see if he would go away, but nope. As soon as I walked out, this dude was waiting outside watching me, but as soon as I left the bathroom, the credits for the movie just finished, so 2 other women in the theater exited at the same time too. There were only 4 of us in the entire theater. So as a group, we all left and got on the same elevator. Also to note, this dude was wearing a very large trench coat, which added to his creepy factor. He was also just looking at me when we were in this elevator, and as we were leaving through the entrance doors, I started to walk fast, and then I ran straight to my car, which was pretty far away. I just look at the dude and he's just standing in the entrance, watching me run to my car. As I was about to leave, I saw him waiting in his car, and it was turned off. He was just waiting for me, I guess. I decided to wait in my car too, and he didn't move or turn it on for at least 5 minutes. I was freaked out at this point and drove out of the parking lot as fast as I could, but as soon as I turned on my car, he turned on his car. I was too fast for him to catch up though, and I drove back home without him following. So creepy trench coat guy who followed me around the theater and parking lot let's not meet. I'm still shaking as I think of where I could have been right now had I not acted on a vibe today in Hobby Lobby. I was at the store to indulge in the springtime sale. As I was browsing the entire store, I noticed that I kept seeing the same man wandering around. I thought that he was there with his wife until I realized that he was there alone. I also noticed that he had a Bluetooth headset in his ear the entire time. Not necessarily suspicious in of itself, but I really got a bad feeling when he followed me around the small floral section as I weaved through the aisles. He kept looking at random flowers when I would look at him. I even saw him either quietly talking to himself or talking to someone on his Bluetooth, most likely the latter. I circled through the store several times to make sure that he was generally following me, and I waited for him to leave before I went to check out. After a while of not being able to see him around me, I went up to the front and got in line. He crept from around the corner and got in line right behind me, still holding 2 random flowers that he had picked up. The cashier rang up my items when I typed a note on my phone. I told her I had an online coupon and showed her the note that said, "The guy behind me has been following me throughout the store." She said that she had to get her manager to verify the coupon. The manager came up and read the note and said, "With the other sale already applied, we might not be able to apply this coupon, but let's step aside to see what we can do." She took me past the register to get the details while the cashier rung up the man. I told her everything, and I looked back. The guy is telling the cashier that he forgot something that he wanted. He then goes back to the floral section to add another random ass stem to his items. He looks at me talking to the manager and tells the cashier that he needs something else and leaves the register again to get another random item. It was at this point I knew that he was stalling to wait for me. The manager picks up on this too and calls the mill staff member to go out to the parking lot to make sure that the man got into his car and drove away. The guy paid for his 4 random flowers and left the store. The staff member came back in and verified that he had drove away and offered to be in the parking lot until I safely made it into my car and left. I'm so thankful to the staff that immediately jumped into discreet action to ensure my safety. Update. I have a few updates to share. After posting this and getting a lot of people advising me to contact the police, I did. After I told them what happened, they told me that this guy was likely a part of a human trafficking team and was what they call the Scout. The Scout is sent out to find a target and was on the phone coordinating with a team to grab me in the parking lot or follow me home. They said that these type of operations have been targeting craft stores and places like Target where women often go alone. They worked with Hobby Lobby and have this security footage that shows face and license plate. I don't know if they have identified him from this, but they've been great at keeping me updated. I also contacted Hobby Lobby corporate and gave them the store number and the names of the employees that helped me. They weren't specific, but they said they would make sure the employees got the recognition they deserved. I don't anticipate any further updates, but if I get any, I will post them. I am 12 years old when I get on a bus 3 blocks away from my house to travel to my friend's house. It's summer break and my parents are at work. They trust me and my brother to watch out for ourselves and travel small distances alone. As I get onto the bus, I happily sit in the seat near the middle, excited to be traveling alone, like an adult. I look around and make eye contact with this man sitting in the back corner. He is alone wearing a big coat despite the warm weather. He looks me blank in the eyes and turns away. 15 minutes pass and it's finally my stop. I just had to get off, cross the street, and walk about 10 minutes up this quiet suburban road to get to my friend's house. I step off the bus and the man with the blank eyes steps out the back. As I walk, I hear his footsteps behind me. I can hear his footsteps getting closer and closer. He remains 2 steps behind me, but I can hear him now. I hear him mumbling, "Little girl," under his breath. I stop. He stops. I look behind me. He stares into my eyes and smiles. My heart is beating faster now. I turn and I feel the air move behind me, like he had stretched his arm out. I speed walk away, thinking. I turn to walk up the driveway, pretending I'm going into my backyard. I get to the back of the house and press myself against the brick, out of sight. I peek around the corner, and the man is standing, staring at the driveway, like he's trying to decide if it's worth following me. I run across multiple backyards until I reach my friend's street. I walk to her house, looking behind me every 2 seconds. I reach her door, but I never feel safe again. This happened earlier this evening, and I'm having a hard time letting it go. I typically have good gut feelings that don't lead me wrong, and I can't stop thinking about this. I was leaving the gym pretty late, and it was already dark outside. There were not many cars, and I'm pulling out to leave. My gym is near some other businesses, but they close way earlier in the evening. So it's pretty dark out, and there's like no people around. I'm needing to make a left turn into some back alleys to be able to make a right turn on a busier road I need to take home. I see a car coming straight, so I decide to wait. When the car is about 100 feet ahead of me, they slow way down but keep coming straight. As the car is driving by me, he is going insanely slow, rolls the window down slightly. It's 20 degrees out and gives me the creepiest smile I've ever seen. Now, I've had several guys smile at me before, hit on me in public, catcall, and even be downright creepy and weird, but I've never seen another person smile like this before. Seriously, it was like his whole face stretched or something. He looked straight up evil. I got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It sounds crazy, but the first thought that came across my head was, this guy looks like he went driving somewhere deserted, decided to kill the first person he sees, and is thrilled to have seen someone. He just slowly drove by, but didn't say a word. Just had this horribly unreal smile and didn't break eye contact. I took off as soon as I could make my turn. I'm checking my mirrors to see if he's following me, and he made several of the same turns I did, and I pretty much floored it. But he was driving slowly, and was not behind me for long. I called my husband when I got home and got my keys ready to sprint into the front door of my condo building. I'm sure no one followed me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. As soon as I stepped out of my car, I swear I heard footsteps. I live in a condo where people walk their dogs, but I just had this gut feeling and sprinted to the doors and inside until I was with my roommate and the doors were locked. It's late now. I'm laying in bed. Roommate went to bed hours ago. I hear what sounds like the door or something in the living room. I go check. All the doors are locked. My cats and roommate are both asleep, and I'm completely freaked out. The hairs on the back of my neck have been raising, and that very rarely happens to me. Something just doesn't feel right, and I can't shake it. I was about 13 at the time. My school had a special trip to Washington, D.C. for a week, so I honestly was excited to go. I'm having a blast. The final day has come, and the teacher takes us to an underground subway. I can't remember what it's called, and it has so many restaurants in there. I chose the Chinese food because it was so good, and I go sit down with my friend. The place was huge, and there were so many people, to the point where I had to wait 30 minutes to get food. Anyways, I was enjoying the time until I noticed this guy kept staring at me. He was like 60 and had his phone out, and I saw a flash. That got my attention, and I realized that he was taking a picture of us. I told the staff right away, and they assumed that he was taking a picture of the place and nothing more. I was angry because it made us so uncomfortable, and I knew my gut was right. I was thirsty for some Starbucks, so I went to get some. I was not alone, but I noticed the same guy was following us. He was acting weird and kept staring at me. I was trying to be nice, so I smiled at him. Right away, he comes over to me and tells me how beautiful I am. That took me off guard. I told him thanks and went back to the staff. He later came back up to me and asked if I had a boyfriend. Finally, the staff had heard it all and told him to get away or they would call the police. He didn't even give a crap about it and kept asking me random creepy questions. The staff got really mad and showed the phone to warn him that they were about to call the police. He finally realizes that they're not kidding and he walked away, but he was still around us to make sure that we could still see him. The staff decided it was time to go back to the hotel and we left. The man started following us and one of the staff members walks over to a police officer and told him about the guy. The police went to him and stopped him so we could leave without being worried that he would follow us. After that, the school decided not to allow any students to go to Washington, D.C. anymore. That was the first time I realized about the danger that women have to go through every day. To preface, this was early 2020, so not recent. I'm a female and at the time I was 20. I was on my way home from my boyfriend's house and stopped at a local coffee shop for a coffee because the bus stopped right in front of it and it was the middle of the summer, so an iced coffee sounded good. I purchased my coffee and when I exited the coffee shop, there was a man beside the garbage having a smoke. I had headphones on, but he initiated a conversation anyway, and I was too polite to just ignore him. After a few moments of very awkward small talk, I excused myself to go home, and he literally invited himself to walk home with me, which I tried to decline, but he either didn't hear me or just straight up ignored, as he told me all about his ex-girlfriend and his failed attempts at a relationship. The kicker was when he told me word for word, I believe we were destined to meet outside the coffee shop, and he asked me for my social media, which I declined, and then promptly told him that I was going to have to part ways with him at this point, because I remembered an errand I had to run. A lie, I didn't want him to know where I lived. He said he hopes to meet me again, and I once again declined giving him my number or anything else, and I promptly called my boyfriend to be on the phone with me for the rest of my way home, as I was very uncomfortable. Several years ago, I walked a handful of blocks up the street from my partner's house to a convenience store to buy something to drink. It was around 11 p.m. and I was trying to slide in there before the store closed. To set the scene, he lived in a transitory neighborhood that was chock full of abandoned houses and crime, with a few occupied residents and businesses scattered around. There were 0 streetlights for illumination. Looking back, the nighttime excursion to the store from my place to his was absolutely idiotic on my part. But after living in that environment for years, you just became accustomed to it. Anyway, it was one of my many foolhardy nighttime store trips. My partner by then would ask me not to do it, but I just ignored that. I wanted my drink. So dumb of me. I got a few blocks up the street in the usual darkness, got my drink, and left the store to head back. Outside the store, a guy was standing near a trash can and hissing everyone who came out, asking for money, cigarettes, etc. I told him I don't have anything and started to cross the parking lot and head back, but this guy sprang after me like a freaking rabbit and grabbed a hold of my arm. He started aggressively demanding that I go to a party with him and trying to steer me down the pitch black side street just beside the convenience store. He was probably 6'7", crazy tall and super thin, with dreads all over his face, making it hard for me to see what he looked like. His fingers bit into my arm, and it felt like it was pinching a nerve. My heart was pounding like crazy right now. I was used to brushing off this type of behavior, having lived in this neighborhood for several years by then. But this was way more aggressive than anything I've faced so far. I shook my arm out of his grasp, told him that I was heading to my boyfriend's place, and it was only a few blocks down the street, and that he was waiting for me. I said sorry in an attempt to placate him and took off speed walking down the street at top speed. He called after me several times, and then I heard quick footsteps as he decided to follow me down the street. By then I could feel my heartbeat in my eyeballs. My mouth had gone cotton dry, and I was almost hyperventilating with fear, trying to stay quiet so this asshole wouldn't hear me. I had this feeling that if I showed fear or looked back at him, it would cause him to react violently right away, so I just put on a burst of speed and tried to outwalk him. However, my 5'5" legs were no match to his crazy long stride, and I could hear little pieces of rock and concrete crunching under his feet as he closed in on me. I literally felt like my heart was going to leap out of my chest and explode from fear. I tried walking even faster, but I could hear the guy right behind me. I could hear his breath in my ear as I got this overwhelming feeling that he was going to grab me any second, maybe with a weapon, and try to force me to walk wherever he wanted me to. The neighborhood is pitch black, so there's no real traffic, not at night. If he wanted to force me to go with him, I'd be powerless. Safe from trying to run from him, but with his height advantage, I knew he would catch up fast. Then I could finally see my boyfriend's driveway, and him standing on the end of it, waiting for me. He had a terrible feeling, and already worried constantly about me walking at night, so he went outside to wait for me. I saw that he had a crowbar in one of his hands, his usual defense weapon. He kept it near his front door. And then my nerve broke, and I started sprinting towards him. The tall dude behind me started to run after me. I reached the place where my boyfriend stood, and squeaked out, "Help!" or something like that. I dove behind him and cowered, waiting for the tall dude to pull a gun and shoot us both or start struggling with my boyfriend. It didn't happen. He gets right up in my boyfriend's face, standing way too close to him, and asked him for a light. My boyfriend gives him one, holding the crowbar aloft in the other hand so that it was very visible. Then I grab a hold of him and yank him into the house, locking the door and absolutely losing it, sobbing and freaking out while trying to choke out what happened. My boyfriend goes looking from the window and sees him kind of standing around and then leaving. He saw him here and there for months afterwards, up at the store or walking down the street. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure, I never took another nighttime walk, and I still have nightmares about it. Several years ago, I was in the midst of an acrimonious divorce with my then husband. Full of crazy allegations and typical angry filings centered around custody of our child. As with many divorces, friends and professional colleagues seem to pick one side or the other. In my case, there was one sort of professional contact who reached out after hearing about the divorce, who offered to be a witness for my case because some of the experiences he related that I had been previously unaware of regarding my ex behavior out at networking events. After the initial call, he started calling me semi-regularly, just making sure I was okay. This wasn't someone I knew well prior to the separation, and he was much older than I was, but claimed to have experience with divorce and custody, so I figured it was a good idea to be polite and not alienate him since his testimony was important, per my lawyer. I kept things friendly, but I always had a weird feeling about him. After a few months, he called one day that my son was very sick, and when I told him I couldn't talk and explained why, he offered to run to the store for me, which I honestly appreciated. But after that, he was dropping by the house uninvited, or he would stop by with cookies for my son, etc. Again, I kept telling myself to keep things polite. The divorce was coming soon. Don't make this guy mad. He had called me out of the blue, and I was worried at that point that I was walking a very fine line, being polite, but clearly not interested, and if he got mad, he might decide to testify for my ex and say who knows what. During this time, he had also helped me set up my security cam my dad had mailed to me. And at one point, I needed someone to walk my dog, and he had offered to do it for me. He used and returned a spare key the same day. One evening, he showed up while I was painting and insisted sticking around to help. Just after that painting day, he came around uninvited and unannounced with magazine photos of decor and started carrying on in this manic way about how we needed to finish decorating the house. I was so weirded out that I made an excuse to leave. I started ignoring his calls and took my son and dog to stay with my parents for several weeks to avoid the drop-ins. I only came home for the custody exchanges. I came home a few weeks later thinking he would have gotten the hint, and it was a quiet day. The following morning I took my son out to the zoo and we both came back hot and tired. I put my kiddo down for a nap in my bed and decided to close my eyes with him. I woke up maybe an hour or so later, and it took me a moment to realize something was off. As I'm blinking off the sleep, I realized there was a rose bush sitting on the bedside table that I most definitely did not put there. There was a post-it note on it, something about planting in my yard. I started shaking immediately because I recognized the handwriting and stood up and splashed some water in my face and decided whether to call my parents or the police. I didn't want any trouble because of the divorce. As I stepped into my bathroom, I realized the mirror was covered in post-it notes, all with super creepy messages that were intended as love notes, but which all scared me. I was still waking up and trying to figure out how these notes could possibly have gotten there. My front door was definitely locked, but as soon as I went room for room, there were notes everywhere. I mean hundreds of post-it notes covering the walls, in my cabinets. There was even one inside my coffee maker. I started grabbing all of them and putting them into a pile when I got one from the kitchen that made my blood run cold. It said, "You're cute when you think no one is watching you." And I realized there was a security camera pointed right where the note was left, the one he had helped me set up months earlier, when I didn't think he was a psychopath. I called my parents in hysterics, sent a bunch of photos, and my dad insisted that I should not call the police, remember the custody battle, but that he would drive over, change the locks, and put a chain on the door. We also immediately changed the password on the security cameras, which had initially been installed to document if my ex tried to break into the house. So there's one on the front porch, but 3 inside the house, including my bedroom. This man was apparently hearing everything going on inside my house for months. The security cameras, I realized that he was just paying attention to my passwords when he was setting up the system, but the only way I figured he got into my house was that he must have made a copy of the key the day he had it, and because my dog had gotten to know him, he wouldn't have barked to warn me, which also scared me. I'm absolutely horrified. This man must have been in my house for a long time. There's no way he could have put that many notes up that quickly, and he was right next to my face and feet away from my son while we were sleeping, and somehow thought that was okay. I left and stayed with my parents for a few days, afraid of what he was going to do when he realized that he was now both physically and digitally locked out of my house. When I came home, my son had to go to his dad's for the night, and I was home alone. I was on the phone with another friend from out of town. About 10 p.m., the man showed up at my door, pounding on it, trying the locks, screaming obscenities, and demanding to be let into his house. Gone were all the niceties. This was someone completely furious and derailed. All I could do was hide in my bedroom until he left. It felt like hours. This was St. Patrick's Day, so I'm sure he had been drinking. After that, there were several other times that someone would start knocking at my door in the middle of the night, always when my son wasn't home. I think he was crazy, but not that crazy, and figured out if I called the police, he'd get in more trouble if my son was there, but he knew the schedule, so I know it was him. He tried reaching out using fake social media accounts several times, always getting blocked. Years later, I discovered he friended my mom on Facebook and was therefore still able to see photos of us that she posted or shared. And there was a huge argument when I saw a conversation they were having about me and how he could get back into my life. I sold that house 2 years later, still finding new notes as I was packing, and I'm more than relieved that he no longer knows where I live. I don't post pictures of my new house online, not the front anyway, and I've changed the privacy setting on all my social media accounts. I avoid all the places I used to go, the networking events he attends, and I stay under the radar as much as possible. I can never bring myself to play back the security camera video because I was traumatized enough and didn't want to see how much danger we could have been in. Hopefully he never sees this post, but you know who you are. I hope we never cross paths again. Okay, to start, at the time I was 19 years old. I'm a female. I was working an early morning job at Safeway. I would leave the house around 5:30 every morning. It was during the winter, so I would often wear a blanket to my car and sit in it for a while it warmed up. So one day my mom stopped by and parked in front of this man's apartment, which happened to overlook where my car is parked. He got super upset she wasn't in a spot, and that was the first time I ever noticed him. He looked about 70 and had a gray beard, was pretty tall and white as well. Anyways, she ended up moving her car and nothing else happened that day, but I think that's the day he noticed me and my roommate, who was also 19 and female. The two of us lived there, and though I've always been borderline paranoid, I always stayed aware of my surroundings. Soon after the encounter, I noticed when I would go to work, I had to pass near his apartment. His light would suddenly be on every morning at 5:30 a.m. when I would leave. I didn't think much of it and continued on, though I started to notice once I'd get into my car, he would be outside walking around and past my car, which I definitely flagged as weird. This continued for a few weeks, but soon enough I noticed his lights would be on and his blinds would be all the way open. Very weird considering it was still dark, 5:30 a.m., and he didn't do this prior. Anyway, I stayed alert and started waking up my roommate when I left, just in case something weird happened. Side note, at this time, my roommate had a car that wouldn't lock. We didn't live in the best area, so she didn't keep any valuables in her car. Just random stuff, including a high school picture. One day, someone broke into her car and didn't do anything, but left her picture on the seat facing upwards. We always found that weird and didn't know who did it. Fast forward. One day, I was super paranoid at this point. I was convinced he was gonna approach me or do something weird. It was a gut feeling. I was walking to my car. I had my back faced towards his window in order to get to my car. I was talking to myself, saying nothing's gonna happen, you're safe, etc. Then my brain told me I needed to turn around. So I did. He was at his window, blinds wide open, staring at me. When he noticed that I turned around, he moved out of sight super fast. I got freaked out and got into my car and locked it. I then called my roommate to tell her what just happened and tried to leave as fast as possible. While I was getting situated, he was walking behind my car and I was trying to stay calm. I ended up leaving and I don't know where he went. After this encounter, I changed my shifts to afternoon due to safety, and me and my roommate decided to move. Never had anything happen since. Anyways, always creeped me out and I wonder what would have happened if I kept working mornings or stayed in that apartment. This is not my story, it's my aunt's, but still scary as fuck. This all started in fall of 1998. I don't remember much as I was 8, but I do know what my aunt told me. And now that it's been so long, it's probably safe to tell. She and my now ex-uncle lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in a fairly nicer area of town. There was definitely some more crime-ridden areas not far away, but their complex was gated and you needed a code to get in. Anyway, around early October, quite a few people, including my aunt, started reporting seeing a suspicious man around the complex. He was caught looking in the windows of people's apartments and their cars, as well as storage areas. Management was able to confirm that he didn't live there. This all happened until around Halloween, when things really went off the rails. According to my uncle, he caught the man snooping around my aunt's car and decided to confront him. The man ran away. Again, this is hearsay from my uncle. When he ran, he dropped a bag that my uncle brought to their apartment. He wouldn't let my aunt open it and claimed he was going to turn it into the police, which we thought he had, as one day there was no longer a bag. Months go by and this man is still creeping around, but only near my aunt and uncle's apartment, cars, and storage area, but nowhere else. My aunt had called the police many times, and by the time they would show up, the man was always gone. It's now January 1999. Here's the part I remember as I was at my Nana's when it happened. My aunt called my grandpa in hysterics. She caught the man with his face pressed up against the glass of her bedroom window, watching her while my uncle was on a work trip. When he realized that he was caught, he tried to break open the window and get inside. My grandpa grabbed his .45 and headed out to the car, with my Nana and I following him all the way, begging him to let the cops handle it, and if he's gonna go anyways, to leave the gun at home. Well, he didn't. It took quite a few hours for my grandpa to finally return home, but when he did, this is what he told us. This man was in the apartment complex dealing drugs. My uncle stole his supply and refused to give it back to him or pay him for it. We later found this out because he was using it himself as well as selling it. So he was planning to kidnap my aunt, among other things, to get his money. I like to say that this thing made her divorce him, but unfortunately she stayed married to him for 10 more years after this. Last week, this man approached me on my way to work. I work in a big facility, so it's not strange that I didn't know him. He started by complimenting me, but in a way that made me feel really uncomfortable. He was telling me things like how I smelled good and I'm so beautiful, and he watches me all the time. He said he wishes he could see me more often and wants to get to know me, to which I replied that I have a boyfriend and I'm not interested. He laughed at me and said that my boyfriend doesn't have to know and that he wants to take me to dinner. He then asked for my number, followed me right to my car by this point. There was no one else around and I started to feel scared as I have some trauma centered around men and telling them no. I just wanted to get away, so I unfortunately gave him the number. I didn't give him a fake number because he handed me the phone in the call screen and had me type my number so he could call, and I was scared that he would test it. I had a panic attack in my car before I went home and hoped that that would be the end of it and that I would just block the number. All weekend he didn't text, but I got a call from the same number 3 times. I don't know if it was him as he didn't give me his number. When I walked into work this morning, he appeared out of nowhere and started talking to me like we had a secret relationship or something. I don't know how he found out what time I start because I've never seen him when I've come in before. I don't think I can report it to HR because I'm stupid and haven't been able to actually tell him that he's making me uncomfortable. I don't know if this will persist, but I'm scared leaving work alone now. I'm a 21-year-old female. One Saturday morning, I decided to go to my local Goodwill. I am disabled and suffer from chronic pain. I use a cane on my good days and a wheelchair on my bad days. Luckily for me, this was a good day. I parked out front and got out of my car and immediately noticed a man sitting in the far corner in front of the Goodwill. As I was walking into the Goodwill, he shouted, "Miss, do you have any extra time for me today?" I had never seen this man in my life and didn't really want to engage with him, so I politely said, "No sir, not today, I'm sorry," and continued walking. He shouted something else at me, but I couldn't make out what he said, and was afraid if I stopped and asked, then he would try to engage me in a conversation. I ignored him and continued walking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him begin to stand up. I walked faster and entered the Goodwill. Thinking I was in the clear, I began walking around the front of the store, just looking at some items. My heart dropped when I glanced through the front window and saw him walking briskly towards the entrance. I immediately thought he might be following me. This happened to me before at Goodwills. Every time, I wound up in uncomfortable conversations where I had to continuously decline the advances of men that I was not really interested in. It's got to the point where I wear a fake ring when I go out so I can say that I'm married, because sometimes they accept that answer better than simply saying that I'm not interested. In that moment, the disability left my body because I picked up my cane and booked it to the nearby rack of ball gowns and hid behind them. Through the gaps, I observed him storming around the store and start to look through the aisles. I was scared because he looked angry, maybe because I ignored him. I didn't want to be rude, but I thought I made it clear in a polite way that I didn't want to speak to him. I don't think that's wrong of me to want to go thrifting without having to engage with random men. A kind woman nearby came up to the ball gowns where I was hiding and pretended to inspect them. She whispered, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think that man in the blue is looking for me." She said she thought so as well. I asked her if any of the nearby dressing rooms were open. She pointed to the one that was open, and when I saw the man with his back turned, I dove underneath the door and locked it behind me. I called my boyfriend from the dressing room in tears and asked him to come to the store. Soon I heard a knock on the door. The kind woman had gotten her manager. She told me that the man had looked through all the aisles. He walked out, grabbing his bag, and left the area. They closed the dressing room I was in and let me hide until my boyfriend arrived. Then, one of the male employees and my boyfriend walked me to my car. That was the end of it. Nothing really dramatic happened, and since we were in public, I don't think my life was in danger, but it was an unsettling experience. I hate to think of the possible confrontation we might have had if he had found me, and I'm just so thankful for the Goodwill employees and the kind woman who helped me out that day. So I live in a pretty sketchy area where there's a shit ton of homeless people. Some shootings have happened, and there's been times where people have gotten kidnapped. I can't deny I'm a pretty attractive girl. I'm 17 and around 5'4". I do appear a bit older to some people, especially because I have tattoos and whatnot. The point is, men tend to approach me a lot, especially older men. I'm sort of used to them staring and catcalling me, but I've never had anyone follow me before. On the weekend, I decided I wanted an Arizona iced tea and some snacks, so I asked my mom if I could walk to the liquor store. It's about a 5-minute walk, so it wasn't far at all, but there's a lot of homeless people and prostitutes who just hang around the path, so obviously you're going to be a bit on edge. I have 3 sharp knives that I always carry on me just in case anything happens whenever I'm out. Nothing usually happens. I've walked to the store a handful of times, so I was pretty comfortable, especially since I had my pocket knives. I got onto the sidewalk and made eye contact with 2 men who were kind of eyeing me. It threw me off immediately, but I just kept walking. The parking lot was kind of full, so I felt kind of relieved. I eventually got inside and got my snacks, and I noticed one of the guys had come into the store right after I entered. I didn't notice this until I realized he was following me through the aisles, and I instantly felt my heart drop. I seen him hovering over items as if he was looking at them, but he just didn't want to come off as suspicious to anyone, since there's 5 other people in there. I get in line and he's right behind me. At this point, I'm shaking and my mind is racing. I paid for my snacks and I started walking towards the door, but my gut knew something was wrong, like really wrong. I'm very intuitive and sensitive to energy, so I felt this times 1,000. I instantly turned last minute and started looking at gift cards right by the door while the guy walked outside, so I assumed he left. I called my mom and explained what happened, and she came to pick me up in her car. She got there, and I walked outside, but I didn't realize the dude was waiting there for me. He purposely stood on the left side of the door so I couldn't see him anymore. I got in the car and my heart dropped when I noticed the whole parking lot was empty, and there were the 2 men waiting for me. He walked up to his friend and started saying something in his ear, and then they both just stared at me for a while we drove off. This shit scared me to my core. It's happened to me a couple more times, but this was the only time that there were 2 people instead of 1. This happened a few years ago. My friend, 19 female, and I, 18 female, were at our local convenience store. We both had guys we were seeing at the time, and we both needed condoms, so we bought 2 boxes and paid together. The cashier was normal, but the guy behind us kind of smiled and laughed at us. He was probably about 30. We left and didn't think anything of it. We got in my car and I drove a town over, about a 10-mile drive. We used to drive around aimlessly for something to do, listen to music, you know. We got to this next town and pulled up to a red light. Suddenly we realized that the guy next to us was trying to get our attention. I rolled my window down. It was the guy that had been behind us at the store. He said something like, "What, I'm not invited to the party?" and laughed. My friend and I looked at each other and were basically like, what the fuck? We drove away as soon as the light changed. That was the end of it. It was a long way to go to make a bad joke and make some teen girls feel uncomfortable. So I'll admit, this is pretty mild compared to other stories here, but it was creepy enough to make me nervous. I was walking to work this morning, and I passed by a park where a few homeless people tend to congregate. As I'm walking, I hear, "Hey." I glance over to my right, and there's 2 guys sitting on the picnic table, maybe 50 feet away, and a few other people milling around a little further away. I wasn't sure who the hey was directed towards, so I kept walking. Then I hear, "Hey shorty." I ignore it. Then it was, "Hey shorty, come here." I called back, "I gotta go to work," an excuse that happened to be true. I didn't think much of it until I got a block past the park, when I heard faint voices behind me. I looked, and 2 guys were walking behind me. I assumed the same 2 guys since there's no one behind me previously. It didn't seem like they were trying to catch up with me, but I picked up the pace and crossed the street to a gas station. I wandered a bit through the store and picked up a few things for lunch, then went in a line to go pay. Just then, the 2 disheveled guys walked through the door, saw me, and they were eyeballing me so hard and kind of whispering to each other. This is when the nerves really started screaming, because I immediately knew that these were the guys from the park, and they were both big guys. Not fat, but very tall and husky. I'm 5'2", and they were easily 6'2" or 6'3". I check out and went over to the door on my phone, acting like I was waiting for a ride or something. But really, I was watching them and waiting for an opportunity to leave safely. I kinda half-heartedly browse around, not actually picking anything up, and the second they were out of sight, behind a shelf, I booked it out of the store. I immediately got out of sight of the store windows, weaved between a few buildings, and crossed a couple streets, so I was a few blocks away pretty quickly. This way, they wouldn't be able to look down the main street to see where I had gone. I was about a half a mile before I got to work, and I made it without incident. Could have been nothing. They might have been planning to go to the gas station anyway, but my gut is telling me otherwise. I think I was somewhere between 10 and 12 when this happened, but I remember it pretty well. I was a very adventurous kid, still am now. I was always outside, wasn't at the house too much, especially around this time, as my parents were going through a divorce, and everything was about them, and as children were somewhat neglected. We lived in a really nice little suburban neighborhood that had a lot of trees and curvy, hilly, windy blocks that was quite a lot of square mileage. Basically, we had a lot of space to explore. I was with 4 friends during the summer. It was the middle of the day, and we were walking back to someone's house after playing baseball or something. 2 of us had scooters and went ahead a little ways, with the other 2 trailing behind, walking. At one point, our scooter friend gets to the end of the block and turns around to wait for the slowpokes, just walking. And I remember getting a strange feeling, but at the time, I didn't really know up from down, so I barely recognized it. They're both looking back at us kinda concerned, which I think triggered that feeling. One of them shouts, "Guys, run!" I look at my friend like, why would they want us to run right now? He says it again with more force, and gave me a sight fright. "Run!" Alright, we start running full speed towards them. Really wasn't that far away, maybe 100 feet, and stopped when we got to them. "Why did you tell us to run?" A car drove by us slower than normal with purple tinted windows and turned around the corner and disappeared. Apparently the car had slowed down and was pulling over. Someone had opened the door, and it seemed to my friends that they were getting ready to grab us. I don't remember seeing that part happen, but I do remember a very eerie vibe of the car, so I'm fairly certain it did. I thought I remembered the same car parked in a nearby driveway, like it lived there and it was there a lot, but I was never sure if it was that exact car or not. Anyways, there's my creepy story. So this happened almost 20 years ago when I was a young 15-year-old girl. I had an older neighbor who taught the drums and was friendly with my family. I would take drum lessons from him once a week. He only lived like a half block down, so I'd always walk, and his family lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. Well, one summery day when I was walking home, at like 4 p.m., broad daylight in a quiet neighborhood, there was a strange man standing across the end of the cul-de-sac. He had on a big cowboy hat, odd for the area, and some facial hair. I don't know, he was maybe in his 30s, and he was just staring at me. He was watching me as I walked down the cul-de-sac and crossed the street, and once my back was to him, I could hear him following me. My heart sped up. My drumsticks seemed like weak protection, and I was wearing thin little flip-flops. I remember thinking if I had to kick him, they weren't going to help me at all. Less than a half block away from me was a more busy street, and I remember thinking if I could just get to that street where people would see, he'd be sure to back off. But his steps sounded closer, and I could taste the panic knowing I wasn't going to make it. I ended up running to a house where I kind of knew the family, and I knew the mom with young kids was probably there. I pounded on her door, tried to open it myself in panic. She opened it, and I spilled into her house and locked the door, told her what was happening, and let my heart calm down a bit. After being in her house for 15 minutes, I asked if I could hop her back fence to go home, since it would cut a block out of travel. But when we slid back the drapes of her back door, the dude was leaning up against the fence, right against her house, where you could see both the front door and the back door. She ended up loading her kids into the car and driving me home, and later had her husband ask around. Turned out the dude was living with his mother and had just gotten out of jail. Not sure what the charges were. All I know was my stomach had been twisted into knots, and it's the first time I tasted fear like that. I don't know what would have happened if he caught up to me. I'm scared and trying to calm down by writing this. At 6:30 this morning, I went to walk one of my dogs. I live in an apartment that resembles a townhome, and I live on the ground floor. As I'm walking my dog, I pass by a row of cars, and all of a sudden my dog stops and starts huffing and puffing at this one truck. No one was in the truck, so I thought it must have been a squirrel underneath it or something. When all of a sudden my dog's attention changes and there's a man that pops up from underneath or behind the truck. I couldn't tell. I immediately turn around and start speed walking back to my apartment. I wasn't wanting to overreact because hey, it might be his truck and maybe he's doing something to it. But then my dog keeps huffing and puffing behind me, and when I turn around, I can see the man clenching something in his right hand and barreling towards me. I immediately take off in a sprint towards my apartment and make it back safely. I immediately woke up my boyfriend, and within the 30 seconds it took him to go outside, the guy was gone. I'm a 23-year-old female, and when this happened I was 21 and with 3 of my best friends. It was supposed to be a fun trip with friends, a chance to explore new places, take in the scenery, and make some great memories. But as we drove through a remote stretch of highway, I couldn't shake this feeling that we were being followed. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as we continued down the road, the same car stayed behind us, always at a distance, never passing us. It was a dark sedan with tinted windows, and I couldn't make out the driver or any passengers. I tried to stay calm and reassure myself that it was just a coincidence, but my nerves were on edge. We eventually stopped for gas and snacks, and as we pulled back onto the road, the car was still behind us. Now I knew something was up. I mentioned it to my friends, but they brushed it off and said I was just being paranoid. As the miles passed, I grew more and more convinced that we were in danger. The car was still behind us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was inside was watching us, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Finally, I had the chance to take some action. I pulled off the road into this crowded parking lot, hoping the other car would just drive past. But my fears came true as it pulled in behind us. I knew we had to do something quickly, so I raced through the parking lot, probably going faster than I should, and quickly turned the car around and headed back up the way we came. The other car followed us for a while, but eventually turned off to the side of the road and disappeared from sight. We were all shaken by this experience and ended up taking a different route to our destination. I don't know what the other car's intentions were, but I'm grateful that we were able to avoid any kind of confrontation. From now on, I'll be much more careful about who's following us on the road. I'm an 18-year-old female. It was a beautiful day outside and I decided to take a walk to the park to clear my head. As I walked down the trail, I noticed someone else was on the path behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another person enjoying the park. But as I continued to walk, I realized that the same person was still behind me and didn't appear to be stopping or changing direction. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling and continued my walk, but the person's presence continued to make me feel uncomfortable. I turned the corner and waited for a moment to see if they would continue to follow me, and sure enough, they did. As I walked faster, so did the other person. I could hear the footsteps getting closer and closer, and my heart started to race. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to turn around and confront them. But as soon as I did, they turned and ran away. I felt relieved that the person had left me alone, but also frightened by the experience. I wondered if they had been following me for malicious intent, or if it was just a strange coincidence. I quickly made my way back home, making sure to look over my shoulder frequently. This experience left me feeling uneasy and aware of my surroundings whenever I went for a walk alone. I made a mental note to be more aware of my surroundings and to always trust my instincts when it comes to my personal safety. I was in the mall shopping for some new clothes when I noticed a man following me from store to store. At first, I thought he might just be browsing the same stores that I was, but as I made my way through the mall, I could tell that he was getting closer and closer. I tried to lose him by turning into different aisles and going to different stores, but he always seemed to be a few steps behind me. I started to feel uneasy and my heart began to race as I realized I was being followed. Every time I would turn around, he would dart off to a different area in the opposite direction, making me even more suspicious. I immediately went to mall security and explained the situation to them. They took me seriously and sprung into action. They patrolled the mall trying to find the man who had been following me. After a few hours, I was contacted and they identified the man and detained him for questioning. It turns out that he had been following me for quite a while and had a history of stalking and harassment. I was so grateful that the mall security took me serious and were quick to respond. This experience has left me shaken, but I know I had done the right thing by speaking up and seeking help. I have not been back to the mall since. I've never spoken about this to anyone, apart from the girl who was with me when it happened. We had just turned 18 and it was in the summer. There's this old abandoned bandstand where we would go to drink wine and talk about the future and watch the stars. We went often. I now realize that this was a bit silly of us, but we were young. One night, it would have to be around 2 a.m. A dude dressed in all black walked past the road above us and looked down at us. My friend was creeped out, and I was like, it's okay. If you don't feel comfortable, we can leave. We started to gather our things, and the guy jumped up through the entrance on the other side. The road he was on to the entrance would have been like a 5-minute walk, and we couldn't have been getting ready to leave for longer than 2 minutes. We run away and he followed us, chasing us up the steps. It was honestly the scariest experience of our lives. My friend was falling over as she ran because she was so scared, so I put her in front of me so I could keep picking her up. She said she had looked behind us and he was so close. She said if he had reached out with his hand, he would have been able to grab my hoodie and pull me back. We ran for about another 10 minutes. I'm not sure exactly when he stopped following us, but it was so scary. We ran onto the grounds of my old high school with the idea of, if he does do anything, he will be on CCTV. We never drank there again after that night and never found out who he was, but I have to believe his intentions were not good. This happened to me in my 20s, about 5 or 6 years ago. I went out for dinner with my friend. I had left my car at her condo since we carpooled. When we returned to her condo, we part ways. She went into her unit by the elevator, and I walked to my car outside. It was around 11 p.m., and there were a lot of lights around, but I still took the precaution considering that this wasn't the best part of town. No one else was outside, no cars leaving or coming in. I got in my car and proceeded to drive on my merry way home as normal. I pulled up to the light and a white SUV pulled up beside me. I absent-mindedly looked around and then looked to my right and made eye contact with the driver. Not sure how long he was staring for, but it was creepy. I suddenly got a cold sweat feeling. I proceeded to drive down the long street and his car was always beside mine. I noticed that he was matching my speed and trying to look over at me. I ignored it. This went on for 15 minutes down the same street. My house was another 15 minutes away. There were other cars, but they mostly turned into smaller streets. I was nervous the whole time, so I texted my friend and my boyfriend and let them know what was happening, but as of now I was fine, and maybe I was just misinterpreting this. At one point, the street became one lane because of the cars parked on the right side overnight, so the SUV ended up behind me the whole way. I finally made a turn to another main street where there was more traffic. Somehow he kept up and was pretty much tailing me. I called my boyfriend freaking out, almost crying at this point. He told me to stay calm and try to turn on another major street and not be on a small one just in case something happened. We hit an area with construction workers working on the road, so the 2 lanes were closing. I was on the far left. He pulled up to the pylons to my right and rolled down his window. I'm pretty sure he was shouting at me at this point. His lips were moving, but I don't know what he said. He pointed at me to roll down my window. He looked angry and a little deranged. I sped off as soon as the light changed, but he was stuck in that lane because no one was letting him through. I was able to get home safely, and my boyfriend met up with me in the garage. I was shaking, but thankfully it never happened again. When I told this story to my friends, there was questions of, what if there was something wrong with your car and he just wanted to tell you? But there wasn't. No flat tire or open door. Gas cap was intact. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted. I am a young teen. I'm quite small. I'm female, and I have bad anxiety, so I usually keep my head down and stay away from situations. Well, recently I've gotten a bit more chaotic and unwinded a bit, so I've been doing more risky stuff. Anyways, I took my friends to the mall for a girls' day, and we were there from morning to night. My father brought everyone back home, and one of my closer friends decided to stay the night. So we get back to my house, and we put all our new stuff inside, and played video games for around an hour. Then I had the brilliant idea to go to the park. My friend agreed, so we got ready, and around this time, it was 12:40, almost 1 a.m. My dad hesitantly let us, but if the park had a closing time, we had to walk the block instead. The park ended up being closed, so we walked around the block. My friend was a bit scared, so she FaceTimed her girlfriend and we listened to music on our AirPod and got some pictures. 10 minutes into walking the block a few times, my friend got off the phone and we planned on going back. I have to explain what the block looks like. My house is in the middle, the park is in the corner, and a few family friends live near. So we walked down one of the roads one last time, and there was a party going on at one of the houses next to the park. When we originally walked by this park, a boy at the party called my friend emo. So anyway, there was a truck next to the house facing the park, and 3 people were in the truck. One man, in his 30s or so, was still getting in the truck and looked at me for a few seconds. We waited for them to drive by while standing at the park grounds at the entrance, but the truck didn't move. My friend stopped to change her playlist on my phone while I watched the truck. Then after the men in the truck watched us for a few minutes, they pulled into the park inches away from my friend. I grabbed my friend's arm and pulled her, and we ran fast. The truck took a U-turn and started following us, so I ran into a lady's yard with my friend, hoping that they would think that was our house. They stopped for a little bit and ended up driving past. My friend and I ran back to my house and told my dad, and didn't leave the house until the next morning. A couple days ago, I was walking the dog around my lake at my condominium, like I always do. It was around 6:30 p.m., and the sky was getting a little dark. My dog is a golden retriever, and she's very friendly with other people and dogs. She is 6 months old and rarely barks or growls at anybody. She actually loves being petted by strangers, but she is usually very calm regardless of if people pet her or not. Anyway, we were walking and suddenly I turned around and saw a guy coming out of nowhere. The guy looked odd. He had glasses and he walked nervously. He was still far away from us, so I don't think he was nervous about my dog. As he got closer to us, I just stopped and moved to the side like I usually do when someone's coming up behind us. I do this so they can walk ahead of us, and my dog stops constantly, looking back, moving its tail, looking forward to being pet. But instead, my dog starts getting restless and starts growling nervously while looking at the guy. I try to calm her down and smiled at the guy, trying to be friendly, but the guy just looked at me with a serious face and started reaching for something in his backpack. At this point, my dog starts barking and I just get this bad feeling and shiver down my spine. For a second, I thought, what if this guy had a weapon or something? The guy kept walking, looking at me while reaching his backpack as my dog kept barking at him. I apologized for my dog's behavior and tried to tell him that my dog usually doesn't behave like that, but the guy just ignored me. Finally, he just passes us and my dog stops barking but is still agitated. I just sat down next to her, trying to calm her down, while the guy just gets lost between some houses instead of walking up the lake path, which seemed weird to me. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe the guy just didn't like dogs, which is fine. I try to be really respectful to people who don't like dogs. After he got lost from my sight, my dog just went back to her usual friendly self and we were able to finish our walk. But something really felt weird about this guy, and this encounter has made me feel uncomfortable. This happened to me years ago when I was around the age of 19 or 20 and worked retail part-time at the mall. I was the closing shift that night and left around 10:30 p.m. to head home. I often took the inner streets, first the freeway, which included a small stretch of back road that was usually pretty empty, especially during this time of night. This particular night, I noticed a car about 10 minutes into my 30-minute drive home, going the same way as me, and at the time, didn't think much of it. As we were approaching the stretch of back road that's usually deserted at this time, the driver behind me started flashing his high beams and slowing down and speeding up while tailgating me. I remember feeling panicked, like they might hit my car. Eventually the car pulls up beside me, and now I can see a middle-aged man that's pointing towards the back of my car and then motioning me to roll down my window. I rolled down my window about halfway and he said something about how it looks like my tire is flattening and I'm gonna damage my rim if I didn't pull over soon. I tell him I don't know how to change a tire, but I'm not too far from home, so I should be fine. But he's pretty insistent about it would only take a few minutes and that he would be happy to help. I know something is off because my car seems to be driving fine. I politely say I'm fine, but thanks anyway, and roll up my window. He drives next to me for what feels like forever, but it couldn't be more than a few minutes or so. At this point, something feels so off that I'm afraid to even physically look in his direction. I focus on the road the best I can, and eventually he slows down and moves to get behind me again. After a few minutes, we reached a more populated, well-lit part of town, and I see him make a U-turn. I get home and take a look at my tire, and it's perfectly fine. I have no idea if he followed me from the mall or what the man's intentions were, but I think it's safe to say they weren't anything good. I even had my dad check all my tires the next morning, and the tire pressure on all of them was in the normal range. I still think of that night from time to time, and it makes me nauseous to think about how different things might be today if I decided to pull over that night. I'm a new mom. My daughter means the world to me. This happened to me when she was almost 1 year old. We were in the fruit and veggies section of Fred's. It had been a normal day. Some people waved at her, some smiled, a few others sent kind words her way. My daughter was enjoying interacting with passerbys, but then out of the corner of my eye, I see a man trying to communicate with my daughter. He made sounds loud enough to get her attention, but quiet enough that I wouldn't hear. I only saw because he was making some weird kissy faces at her as he did it. Something about it felt terribly off. Usually people interact with her while making it very obvious to me, but this guy was making an effort to stay just out of my eyesight while keeping his eyes on my daughter. I've never experienced anything like this before. I was alone and unsure what to do, so I just left this section of the store and tried to forget about it. Later on, while checking out, I saw once more that man. He was right behind me in the checkout lane next to mine, staring wide-eyed with a blank expression at my daughter. I froze. I recalled the cashier asking me if someone was making me feel uncomfortable, but I was so shaken up that I couldn't get the words out. She called an escort for me. An employee walked us out to our car as I manically scanned the row of cars. He loaded my car up as I buckled in my daughter and patiently waited till I locked the doors and drove off to go back inside. Perhaps I was overthinking things, but that sense of terror is something I'll never forget. I'm female. A few years ago, I think I was 21. I was going back home after a party. It was between midnight and 1 a.m., and I had to take the tramway to get back home. When I got in, I didn't feel very safe, because at this hour, there are many people, and a lot of them are either high or drunk. So I put my earphones in and began to listen to music, but I felt that something was odd. You know when you have this feeling that someone's looking at you, but you just can't see them? That's what I felt. So 20 minutes had gone by, and I arrived at my station. There were a few people who stopped there, but I saw a guy looking at me and walking towards me. I get a little scared and try to walk as fast as I could, but I had 1 kilometer to make it home. Plus, there was no one in the streets except me and this guy. It was a residential area. I tried to calm down by telling myself that I was just paranoid. So I looked back and I saw that the guy was walking at the same speed as me. So I panicked and one of my earphones fell as I heard the guy next to me. I froze. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And then the guy asked me for a cigarette. I told him I had none and he left. It must be silly, but I scared myself for a simple cigarette. Please guys, I beg you, do not run after anyone to ask them for a cigarette, especially at night. This happened a few months ago. I'm a 23-year-old male. I was driving home from a trip to the store while talking to my friend on the phone. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. I pull into my driveway, park, and talk to my friend for a minute while I'm sitting in the car. All of a sudden, the sketchy car pulls up directly behind me. There's no way I could back out without hitting the passenger side of it. It's dark, my driveway lights are kinda dim, and they deliberately turn off the lights of their car when they pulled up behind me, but I faintly spotted 3 guys in it. I'm feeling real creeped out at this point, so I asked my friend, what should I do? We both decided that I should wait it out a bit and see if they would leave. A few minutes go by and they're still there. Eventually, we figured the best plan of action would be to stay on the phone, calmly grab my bags from my trunk without breaking eye contact with the people in the car, and walk to my door, which is only about 15 feet away. In retrospect, it would have probably been a better idea just to call my parents and ask them to open the door for me from the inside. I stepped outside, then grabbed my stuff from the trunk. The guy in the rear passenger seat of the car cracks the door open, and the guy in the front passenger seat is staring me down. They're definitely assessing if I'm a viable target. I kept eye contact with them, but I felt like a deer in headlights. It felt like ages, but must have been 2 or 3 seconds at most. Suddenly, the guy in the rear shouts something to his buddies along the lines of, "Oh fuck, it's a guy," and they speed away at like 80 miles per hour on a residential street. I was relieved, but mostly confused. I updated my friend and let them know that I was alright, then I walked inside. I'm a male, 5'9", and slightly overweight with a baby face, so I don't exactly come across as intimidating to most people I meet, so I doubt I scared them off because of my appearance alone. I'm terrified to think what could have happened to me if I were female. It legitimately really messed me up. Why am I safe from these things? Meanwhile, my sister and my female friends have no choice but to keep guns in their car, get teeny cans of pepper spray for their keychains, and avoid being alone in general. It's a scary place out there. Whether you're male or female, always be vigilant. I used to think my neighborhood was relatively safe, but now I'm afraid of sitting in my driveway at night. My friend and I are both young females, small petite build. We had been drinking at the hotel and decided to walk the main strip, about a 20-minute walk, at around 9:45. We were laughing, listening to music, and just having plain fun at this point. Now this is when shit started to go south. Out of nowhere, a lady pops out in front of us. She obviously looks like she's on something. She's twitching, walking super funny, and she's on her phone, which is important. So my friend and I step around her because she was initially going the opposite way. Then all of a sudden, she walks past us, going in our direction, and while she's getting ahead of us, she's looking back and speaking into her phone. I for some reason was already feeling kind of uncomfortable, so my friend and I slowed down to let her get more ahead of us, and decided to go down another street, because why not? The lady sees this, speaks into the phone again, and crosses with us. I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking that maybe she's uncomfortable and feels unsafe and is trying to use us as cover, but my gut was telling me otherwise. So while she was walking in front of us, she's still frequently looking back and talking into the phone. So we crossed the street again to put some distance between us. This time, the lady almost turns down a street where a man wearing all black walks out in the same direction we were going. The lady stops at this cross and just stares at us, then steps behind some kind of brush. The man went about 300 feet in front of us on the opposite side of the street, and then turned around and walked back to the same street the lady was at. We were speed walking, so where they supposedly stepped off was now out of sight. My friend was local at the town that we were staying in, so she was already calling a friend who lived 2 blocks down to come get us. Around this time, I looked back to see both of them speed walking towards us. At this point, I'm trying to make it obvious that I noticed them by turning around, pointing, and yelling. Luckily, when they were about 2 blocks away, her friend arrived and we sped off. For some context, I'm a female, and this happened a couple years back when I was around 26. This happened in a big city. I was out with my dog, a little chihuahua, headed to a vet appointment. I forget what happened at this time, but it ended up being nothing serious. But I was pretty anxious and focused on getting to the vet as soon as possible. I was wearing a mask because it was in the middle of the worst part of COVID, and I was wearing a t-shirt with my university on it. I suddenly lock eyes with a guy on the sidewalk headed in the opposite direction, and he comes up to me while I'm walking and goes, "You went to this university?" I said yes. He turns and started walking with me along the sidewalk, the opposite way that he was initially headed in. Side by side, he was explaining what a great school it is and how he's in grad school there. Somehow I felt that this was unlikely. He looked 30 plus and didn't seem to know anything about the college, not giving me any details. He starts asking me more questions, and at this point, I'm speed walking down the block and he just keeps walking right next to me. My dog at this point is getting really antsy, and I'm incredibly uncomfortable as I have no clue who this guy is or why he's trying to walk with me on a busy sidewalk. Suddenly, my dog starts to bark and growl at him aggressively, and he doesn't seem to care and just keeps walking with me. At this point, it's been like 5 to 10 street blocks, with me trying to keep my dog from growling and barking, and him asking me questions. I try to explain that I'm going to a vet appointment, but I was nervous. Eventually he goes, "Can I see you without your mask?" I legit flat out say no, to which his eyebrows go up like he's shocked. He keeps pushing, and I keep flatly telling him no. Then he tells me that he wants to go get coffee with me. I decline it and tell him I have a boyfriend, which I did, and assured him that I'm getting engaged soon. My dog is still flipping out, barking aggressively at him, but finally after like 10 streets, after he realizes I'm taken, dude departs and leaves me alone. Now I know the most likely explanation is the guy thought I was pretty, wanted to ask me out on a date, and he was awkward, but holy shit, please don't follow a young woman down 10 streets who you don't know. It's unnerving, and I still remember this years later. I guess he made an impression. I'm a 22-year-old female and was 18 at the time. In those days, I was a party girl, going out 3 times a week and drinking a lot. That time was wild. I decided to host a party. It was my first party and I rented a space in my village. It was a cabin, on location for events, very cheap for locals. I organized everything with my 18-year-old female best friend, let's call her Marie, and another friend, also 18, named Rose. We were having fun decorating and preparing the party. I was stressed out that the party was going to be lame. I decided to cope the stress with alcohol. When the party started and most people arrived, I was already tipsy. I invited people I knew from middle school and high school, and some friends I made in college. Even though no one knew anyone, the party was great and people were meeting each other. I had a boyfriend, 19, who was coming with some friends. It was late summer, so the weather was still mild, and most people were outside talking, laughing, and dancing. I had this middle school friend, let's call her Luna, who binge drank and threw up in the entrance of the cabin. She even hurt her foot, so she had some difficulties walking. At this point, I was drunk, but I wanted to help my friend. I asked if she wanted to be put to bed, and she said yes. I took her arm and guided her to my house. I live in a small village in the countryside, so it takes less than 5 minutes to get to my house. It was super safe. I used to wander alone in the streets late at night, 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. when I had insomnia, and nothing ever happened. It was pitch black. We were the only ones outside. As we walked, we saw a white SUV, but I didn't think much of it. I came home, gave her some water, and let her sleep in my room. I was alone with my sister that night. I warned her of the presence of my friend and headed back to the party. I was not walking straight since I was intoxicated. I saw the white SUV parked near the farm. As I continued walking, a black car stopped next to me, and opened their windows. I looked at the man. I still don't know what age he was. It was so dark. He said to me, "I've seen this white SUV following you for a while. It seems dangerous. You should come into my car." I was drunk, but I directly felt like something was wrong. I just answered that I was okay and my friends were nearby. He insisted. He repeated to come to his car for my safety. My inner alarm went off as I was trying to walk faster and answered again that I was okay. Suddenly, I heard the car door open. He was not alone. I didn't think twice. I just ran for my life. I arrived quickly to the cabin. My friends were all drunk. One of my drunk male friends was complimenting Rose. They saw me come up in a hurry. The male friend looked at me and started to compliment me. I told him, "Man, someone just tried to abduct me." He stared at me and told me that I shouldn't have left alone, that it was not safe. The party lasted until 4 a.m. People who didn't drink took their cars and left. The few others were inside the cabin and started to talk. One of my boyfriend's friends was mad on their Snapchat group because he forgot the knife at the cabin. I told them about what happened and they were all spooked. After the event, I stopped walking in the village late at night, but I hosted a few other parties. I've never seen this man in his black car again. Most people keep telling me how great the party was. A couple who met at the party are still together, but I still wonder to this day what would have happened to me if I didn't react that spontaneously.